quiet winter street where the snow falls slowly and the city finally grows tired, there is a little bakery that only wakes after 10. Its windows glow like a lantern in the dark, and inside, a gentle woman bakes waffles and gingerbread for those who just can't go home yet. Night nurses, taxi drivers, broken hearts, and wandering souls slip through her door, not to explain themselves, but simply to sit in the warm light, eat something sweet, and listen to old Christmas stories that make the night feel soft again. Tonight, if you'd like, you can sit with them too. Snowfall Street was a narrow ribbon of cobblestones tucked away from the louder avenues of the city, a place where footsteps echoed softly and the lamps wore halos of frost. On winter nights, the street seemed to drift slightly apart from the world, as though it existed on the edge of a quiet dream. Snow fell in slow, patient flakes, turning parked cars into soft white mounds and covering rooftops with pale, velvety blankets. The wind did not howl here. It sighed along the eaves and brushed the bare branches of the trees, making them shiver in a gentle rhythm. Windows were mostly dark by 10 o'clock, curtains drawn, families inside their homes folded into sleep or late conversation. All was still, all was muted, except for one small square of golden light near the far end of the street, where a sign patiently waited to wake. At exactly 10 o'clock, as the church clock far away chimed in muffled strokes through the snow-heavy air, the sign in that window flickered on with a soft, warm glow. The letters were painted in a delicate, curling hand, a little faded with time, but still full of charm. La Boulangerie de Minuet, the Midnight Bakery. Beneath the letters, in smaller script, someone had once added open after 10 for wandering hearts. Inside, behind the glass, a tiny bell hanging over the door gave a silvery tremble, not yet rung, but already aware that night visitors would soon arrive. The lock on the door clicked gently, as if turning itself, and the handle loosened, ready to welcome whoever might be walking alone under the falling snow. From the inside, the bakery's lights were not harsh. They were low and golden, pooling softly on polished wooden tables and shelves dusted with flour, like fresh, pale snow. Madame Elise moved slowly through this warm, fragrant space, as if listening to music that only she could hear. She was in her late 40s, with silver threads gently woven into her dark hair, which she wore twisted into a loose bun at the nape of her neck. Her face carried the fine lines of someone who had smiled often, and her brown eyes were calm, watchful, touched with a light that was both kind and slightly distant, as though one part of her was always listening to some older story behind the present moment. The sleeves of her soft woolen cardigan were pushed up as she checked the trays in the ovens, and a pale blue apron, dusted with flour and sugar, tied around her waist. The heat from the ovens wrapped around her like a familiar embrace, and the scents that rose into the air were rich and comforting. Vanilla, cinnamon, nutmeg, and the dark, sweet warmth of melted chocolate. On the counter, waffles waited to be baked to a golden crispness, and neat rows of gingerbread rested on cooling racks, their little sugared edges glinting under the lights like tiny pieces of amber. Outside, the snow continued to fall, pressing sound into softness and making the street seem more and more like a quiet, silver passage between the busy day that had ended and the dreams that had not yet begun. Madame Elise moved to the front window and with a gentle, practiced motion lit a small candle that stood in a blue glass holder. The flame rose, steady and calm, casting a tender glow that added its voice to the warm light inside. She knew that from the street, that single candle would look like a beacon, something you might notice from the corner of your eye when you were not ready to go home yet. She did not place signs on lampposts or advertisements in newspapers. The bakery did not need them. Those who needed it found their way, guided by late steps, quiet hearts, and the silver snow that seemed to nudge them gently in this direction. She had seen it happen so many times that she no longer questioned it. A nurse's slow, tired walk, a driver's car pausing at the end of the street for reasons he could not explain, a figure in a heavy coat stopping under the lamp and turning, as if hearing a name being called. Inside, the rules of the bakery were simple and unspoken, like the rules of a dream. No loud voices, no sharp laughter that cut the air, no harsh words that might bruise the silence. People could speak, of course. There was room for soft conversation, for a few quiet questions, for simple gratitude murmured over a cup of hot chocolate. But the place itself seemed to gently guide visitors toward stillness. The chairs did not creak loudly. The floorboards did not groan. Even the old clock on the wall, with its brass pendulum and worn numbers, ticked in a slow, hushed rhythm, more like a heartbeat than a machine. Time inside did not stop, but it softened. Minutes stretched, becoming wider and gentler, allowing the body to rest and the mind to uncurl from its tight worries. People who came in often found themselves speaking less than they expected, saying only what was necessary, sometimes saying nothing at all. Here, it was enough to sit, to breathe, to feel the warmth seep into cold fingers and toes. Madame Elise understood all of this without needing to explain it. She had opened the bakery many winters ago for reasons that belonged to her own story. But she had quickly learned that the night had its own kind of guests. There were nurses from the hospital 2 streets away, white shoes dusted with snow, the smell of antiseptic still clinging faintly to their uniforms. There were taxi drivers whose engines had finally cooled for the night, leaving them alone with the quiet hum that lingered in their ears. There were people who simply did not wish to go home yet, newly divorced, newly lonely, newly uncertain of what awaited them behind their own front doors. They came in with shoulders tight and eyes clouded with thought, and she welcomed them with a nod, a smile, and the offer of something warm and sweet. She never asked many questions. She never pressed. She had learned that not everyone wanted to pour their hearts out. Some burdens preferred to sit silently at the table, slowly dissolving into the steam of a cup or the crumbs of a cookie. On this particular night, as she set out small porcelain plates patterned with faded blue flowers and straightened the silver sugar jar, Madame Elise felt the familiar hush of anticipation. The first visitors would soon arrive. They always did, though she never knew exactly who or when. She adjusted the small vase on the counter, where a few evergreen branches and white winter flowers rested in cool water, bringing the forest into the heart of the city. Outside the window, a gust of wind stirred the snowflakes, sending them swirling in little dances under the street lamp. The night sky above the rooftops was a deep, velvety blue-black, sprinkled with faint stars that blinked as if drowsy. Somewhere, a distant church bell finished chiming the hour, and then the silence layered itself back over the street, soft and complete. She stood for a moment with her hand resting lightly on the back of a chair, simply listening. She listened to the ovens, breathing out heat. She listened to the ever-so-quiet ticking of the clock. She listened to the whisper of the wind pressing against the window panes, to the soft sigh of the building itself as it settled deeper into the night. In that small pause, she thought, as she often did, of the bakery as a harbor, a little cove of warmth and sweetness in a great sea of cold, silver streets and distant, glowing windows. People could dock here for an hour or two, rest their tired spirits, and then sail back into their lives with hearts slightly less heavy. This was all she wanted for them. Not miracles, not sudden transformations, just a gentle easing, a softening at the edges, a sense that the world could still be kind. Then, from outside, she heard it. The quiet crunch of footsteps on snow, slow and uncertain, drawing closer. The little bell above the door trembled, as though it, too, had heard and was ready to sing its delicate note. Madame Elise smoothed her apron with one hand, moved behind the counter, and let a small, welcoming smile soften her face. The door handle turned with a careful click, and a breath of cold air slipped in, carrying with it the smell of snow, the faint sound of distant traffic, and the presence of someone who was not quite ready to go home. The bakery was open. The night, with its gentle, silver silence, had begun to bring her the souls it wished her to shelter. Lena stepped into the bakery with the careful movements of someone who had been awake for far too many hours, the cold clinging to her like a second uniform. For a moment, she stood just inside the door, letting it close softly behind her, while the warmth folded around her shoulders in a slow, comforting wave. Snow still dusted the tops of her shoes, melting almost at once on the polished wooden floor, leaving small, shining drops that caught the light. Her hospital coat, pale blue under the heavier winter jacket, carried a faint scent of antiseptic and clean linen, a smell that seemed to belong to fluorescent corridors and softly beeping machines. Under the gentle lamps of the bakery, that scent began to mingle with other, kinder smells: cinnamon, butter, vanilla, and something bright and sweet that she could not quite name yet. Her shoulders sagged, just slightly, as if they had been held up by invisible strings all day and were finally allowed to sink. Madame Elise looked up from behind the counter as the bell above the door gave its silver chime. She did not greet Lena with surprise. She recognized the particular stillness in the nurse's posture, the way her hands lingered near the pockets of her coat, as if not yet ready to let go of the day. She had seen Lena before on other nights, though not often, and always at the end of the longest shifts. Tonight, Lena's hair was tucked back in a practical knot, a few strands escaping to curl near her temples from the dampness of the snow. Her eyes were ringed with fine shadows, yet they still held a steady, attentive light, the look of someone who had listened to too many stories of pain and had held them carefully without letting them spill. A faint trace of glitter clung to one sleeve, where a child at the hospital had touched her earlier that evening with sticky, determined fingers. Under the bakery lamps, that glitter caught the glow and shone like tiny stars scattered on her cuff. "Good evening, Lena," Madame Elise said in her soft, even voice, as if they were continuing a conversation they had begun weeks ago rather than starting a new one. "The snow is kind tonight. It falls slowly." She did not ask how the shift had gone. She did not ask who had been ill or who had been frightened. She knew that such questions could pull too much to the surface. Instead, she gestured toward the table by the front window. A small round table with a view of Snowfall Street and the steady drift of flakes under the lamp. "Your usual place is waiting. Sit. Let the night be quiet for a while." Lena nodded, the motion small but grateful, and crossed the room with quiet steps. The soles of her shoes made only the faintest sound against the wood, as if even her footsteps had learned to move softly out of respect for sleeping patients and fragile dreams. She unwound her scarf, folded it neatly, and draped it over the back of the chair. Then she sat, slowly, feeling the chair accept her weight, feeling her knees unlock. Her hands, which had been so busy for hours taking pulses, adjusting pillows, smoothing blankets, now simply rested on the table, fingers loosely interlaced. Through the window, the night looked like a soft painting. The street lamp, the silver flakes, the silhouettes of bare branches veiled in white. It seemed distant and peaceful, as if made not of cold air, but of quiet light. Without needing to be asked, Madame Elise moved with practiced grace. She poured a mug of hot chocolate into a thick, white cup, the steam rising in gentle curls that smelled of cocoa and a hint of cinnamon. Then she opened one of the glass jars on the counter and selected a plate of star-shaped ginger cookies. Their edges dipped in a delicate glaze that shimmered faintly. Each cookie had been pressed with a pattern before baking, tiny lines that suggested rays of light or snowflakes. Arranging them with care on a small plate, she carried both cup and plate to Lena's table and set them down with a quiet clink that barely disturbed the air. "For the nurse with starlight on her sleeves," Elise said softly, giving a small nod toward the glitter on Lena's cuff. "These are for those who keep watch when others sleep. Ginger for warmth, stars for guidance, chocolate for comfort. They go well with snow and a tired heart." Lena gave a breath that was almost a laugh, though it came out in a hushed, worn-out way. "Thank you," she murmured, fingers curling around the warm mug. The heat seeped into her palms and then spread up her arms, loosening something inside her chest. She took a sip, letting the thick, sweet warmth rest on her tongue before swallowing. It tasted rich and deep, like the dark sky outside. But it also held a sweetness that reminded her of childhood winters, of hands wrapped around a cup at a kitchen table while her mother hummed a carol. The memory brushed past her gently, like a wing. She picked up one of the star cookies and broke it in two, the soft snap of gingerbread sounding oddly loud in the quiet room. The smell of spice rose up, comforting and familiar, and she chewed slowly, letting herself notice the texture, the hint of orange, the tiny crunch of sugar on top. For a while, neither of them spoke. The bakery seemed content simply to hold them in silence. The clock on the wall ticked in its slow, steady rhythm, each second passing without hurry. The ovens murmured quietly, keeping their own warm counsel. Somewhere at the back, water trickled softly in a small sink, like a distant, gentle stream. Outside, the snow fell and fell, each flake joining the others in a peaceful, silent descent. Lena's breathing deepened. She felt the day begin to loosen its grip on her shoulders, the images of bright hospital lights and long corridors fading into softer shapes. She thought of the patients she had tended that evening, the old woman who liked her pillows puffed twice, the little boy who insisted his stuffed bear must sit on the bed during the night, the man who had thanked her with a shy, embarrassed smile for simply refilling his water glass. They passed through her mind not as burdens, but as small, steady lights. When Elise finally spoke again, her voice was calm and low, as if she were telling a secret to the air itself. On nights like this, when the snow falls so gently, I'm always reminded of a story my grandmother used to tell. Would you like to hear it? She did not press. She simply offered the story the way she offered pastries, quietly and without demand. Lena nodded, closing her eyes for a moment. Yes, she said, the word coming out on an exhale. I think I would. Elise settled into the chair across from her, resting her folded hands on the table. She did not need a book. The story lived in her memory, polished by many retellings. She used to say, Elise began, that on certain winter nights, when the snow falls slowly enough, the sky sends down not just flakes, but angels. Not the grand, shining kind that blaze with light and trumpets, but very small ones, quiet and almost invisible. They come down to sit on rooftops and windowsills, to perch on street lamps and hospital roofs, and to keep watch with the ones who cannot sleep. They have soft wings and even softer footsteps, and they carry no weapons, only a deep patience that can last the whole night long. As she spoke, Lena half opened her eyes and looked out into the snowy street. The flakes seemed to move more slowly, as if responding to the words. It was easy, in that moment, to imagine little shapes perched on the lamppost, on the roofs opposite, on the very ledge of the bakery window. Not frightening shapes, not stern or judging, but small presences made of silver light and soft breath, sitting quietly and watching. The idea settled over her like another layer of warmth, easing the thin, sharp anxieties that often lingered after her shifts. The the worry that she had missed something, that she had not done enough. "The angels of snow," Elise continued, "do not change what is meant to happen. They do not stop time or alter fate. They do something simpler, something gentler. They sit beside those who are awake and tired nurses at their stations, drivers on their routes, parents at sickbeds, souls who cannot find rest, and they share the weight of the watching. They do not speak, but they listen. They listen to every quiet thought, every half-formed wish, every unvoiced prayer. My grandmother said that just knowing they were there made the night feel lighter, as if the world did not rest on your shoulders alone." Lena took another slow sip of hot chocolate and let the story sink in. She pictured the nurses at the hospital right now, moving from room to room, checking monitors, tucking in blankets. She imagined tiny, silver-winged figures sitting on the edges of their desks, invisible but present, humming softly, sharing the long hours. The thought soothed something deep within her, something that had long felt stretched thin. She had chosen this work because she wanted to help, because she believed that tending to others in their most vulnerable moments was a kind of quiet, everyday miracle. But there were nights when the strain of it all, the sorrow, the uncertainty, the endless need felt heavy. Tonight, in the warm glow of the bakery, with the taste of ginger and chocolate on her tongue and the soft snow outside, she felt that burden shift, just a little, becoming more bearable. "And what do they do with all those thoughts?" Lena asked at last, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might break the delicate magic of the moment. Elise smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling. "My grandmother said they carry them back with the dawn," she answered. "When the sky begins to lighten, the small snow angels stretch their wings and rise again, taking with them all the worries and tired wishes they have gathered. They lift them up into the morning light, where they soften and dissolve like frost on a window. That is why," she said, "the world often feels a little lighter in the early hours, even if nothing has visibly changed. The burdens have been thinned by gentle hands. Silence settled between them again, but it was no longer the silence of exhaustion. It was a peaceful, listening quiet, filled with the soft sounds of the bakery and the hush of the snow." Lena finished her drink and her star cookies slowly, savoring each bite as if it were a small, personal ritual. With every swallow, her body felt heavier in a comforting way, as if it were remembering how to rest, how to let go. The glitter on her sleeve sparkled faintly, catching the lamplight like distant stars. And she thought of the children on her ward, their small hands clasping stuffed animals, their breaths deepening as they fell asleep under watchful eyes. When at last she rose to leave, pulling her scarf around her neck again, Lena felt a gentle steadiness in her chest. The night outside no longer seemed cold and indifferent. It seemed soft and silver, a vast, quiet space in which she, too, was being watched over. She turned to Elise with a small, sincere smile. "Thank you," she said, and she meant it for the chocolate, for the cookies, for the story, and for the simple, patient presence, for this and for reminding me Elise nodded as she walked Lena to the door. "The city sleeps more peacefully because of you," she replied, her voice as calm as ever. "It is good that you rest, even for a little while. The snow will walk with you home, and perhaps tonight you will not be the only one keeping watch." The bell chimed softly as the door opened and closed. Lena stepped back into the night, where the snowflakes kissed her cheeks in gentle, cool touches. As she walked down Snowfall Street, the lamplight pooled at her feet and the snow whispered under her shoes. Above, the sky stretched wide and dark and filled with faint blinking stars. She felt, in some quiet, unspoken way, that she was not walking alone. Behind her, the candle in the bakery window burned steadily, a small point of golden light amid the silver. Ahead, the path home seemed softer, the world gentler, and her own heart once again certain of why it chose to stay awake when others slept. Later that same night, after Lena's footsteps had faded softly into the snowy distance, and the bakery had settled once more into its calm, breathing silence, Snowfall Street seemed to take a long, quiet inhale. The snow did not cease, but its rhythm changed, becoming gentler, as if the sky had grown sleepier. The lamplight cast wider halos on the cobblestones, and the wind slowed to a faint, steady sigh along the eaves. Inside the bakery, the candle in the window burned with a steady flame, and the ovens hummed low and warm, like contented animals at rest. Madame Elise moved quietly from table to table, straightening a chair here, adjusting a folded napkin there, her movements as unhurried as the falling snow. She refreshed the vase with a little more water, breathing in the faint scent of evergreen, and then returned to the counter, where a new batch of waffles waited to meet the iron. On a side street, not far away, a taxi engine idled softly at the curb, sending out small ghosts of exhaust that faded quickly into the cold air. Marco leaned forward against the steering wheel, his hands resting loosely at 10 and 2, even though the car was still. He had been driving since late afternoon, weaving through traffic, following neon lights and traffic signals, listening to the same cycle of radio songs and weather reports. People had climbed in and out of the back seat, leaving behind traces of their lives, a whiff of perfume, a stray shopping receipt, the lingering echo of laughter or a sigh. He had dropped them at bright doorways and apartment buildings, at hospitals and bars, at train stations, and quiet homes with porches hung in twinkling lights. He had wished them good night, or good luck, or safe travels. Then the doors had closed, and he had driven on. Now, however, he had paused. He was not quite sure why. Something about the way the snow fell on this particular corner, or perhaps the way the light collected in the distance, had made his foot ease off the accelerator. He stared through the windshield, watching the flakes tumble and drift, illuminated by his headlights. They reminded him of dust motes floating in a sunbeam, only colder, quieter, silver instead of gold. His eyes burned with tiredness, and his back ached from the same posture held for hours. He could drive home, he told himself. He could head toward his small apartment and its familiar silence, the worn sofa, the television waiting with its late-night programs. Yet a part of him resisted, not out of dread, exactly, but out of a longing he could not quite name. He was not ready to go home, not yet. The night felt as if it still held something for him, something gentle and necessary. He shifted into gear and let the car roll forward, turning almost absent-mindedly onto Snowfall Street. The tires made a soft, crunchy sound on the freshly fallen snow, and the buildings on either side rose like quiet, watching shapes. The street lamps glowed with a muted warmth, and the windows of most houses were dark or softly curtained. As he eased along, his gaze caught on a small square of light near the far end of the street, a window with a candle burning in blue glass and a soft glow behind it. The sign above the door came into view, its letters slightly blurred by the falling snow, but still readable. La Boulangerie de Minuit. He did not remember ever taking this route before, yet the sight felt oddly familiar, like a scene from a half-forgotten dream. Without fully deciding to, Marco pulled the taxi to the side of the street and turned off the engine. The sudden quiet, after hours of background vibration, was almost startling. For a moment he sat there, hands resting on his knees, listening to the ticking of the cooling engine and the faint hush of snow against the roof. Then he took a slow breath, reached for his scarf, and stepped out into the night. The cold met him gently, brushing his cheeks and nose, but it did not bite. It whispered. He locked the car, tucked his keys into his pocket, and walked toward the small bakery, his boots leaving clear tracks in the fresh snow. As he approached, the warm light grew, spreading out across the pavement like a welcoming gesture. The bell above the door chimed softly as he opened it, letting in a little gust of winter air and the faint scent of exhaust that still clung to his jacket. Then the door closed behind him, and the bakery's warmth enveloped him at once, wrapping around his shoulders and seeping into his bones. It smelled of sugar and butter and something spicy, the comforting, golden smell of a place where ovens work late into the night. The low, gentle light smoothed the edges of the tables and chairs, and the quiet tick of the clock on the wall quickly replaced the hum of the taxi engine in his ears. It was like stepping from a busy road into a soft, sheltered garden where everything moved at a slower, kinder pace. Madame Elise looked up as he entered, taking in the slightly hunched set of his shoulders, the weary lines around his eyes, the way his fingers flexed once, automatically, as if they were used to gripping a steering wheel. She saw the faint smears of salt on the bottom of his trousers, and the way snow clung to the folds of his jacket, and she understood. "Good evening," she said in that calm, quiet voice that never rushed anyone. "The snow has driven you to harbor, I see. You're welcome to rest here for a while." There was no question in her tone, only an invitation, open and gentle. Marco cleared his throat, the sound rough in the peaceful air. "Evening," he replied. He hesitated, then added, "Long night on the road. I saw your light. Thought I'd just see." He felt oddly shy, though he had spent a lifetime speaking to strangers in the back seat of his car. Perhaps it was the silence, or the softness of the place that made his usual small talk feel too loud. Elise gestured toward a table not far from the counter, one with a view of the window and the falling snow. "Sit," she said. "Your wheels can rest, and so can you. I have waffles fresh from the iron if you'd like. Powdered sugar, a touch of vanilla. They're especially good for those who have driven under too many streetlights." He almost smiled at that, an expression tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Waffles sound good," he admitted, removing his jacket and draping it over the back of the chair. He sat, feeling his spine adjust, his muscles protesting and then beginning to loosen. Through the window, the lamppost outside looked like a quiet sentinel, watching over the street and the car he had left at the curb. For the first time in hours, he was not moving, not turning, not calculating routes. He simply sat, listening to the soft murmur of the ovens and the gentle shifting of the building around him. Elise moved with quiet efficiency, ladling batter onto the hot iron, the hiss and faint crackle telling her exactly when to close the lid. The scent swelled in the room, rich and sweet, with a hint of caramel as the waffle browned. She prepared a small pot of tea as well, something with a light, soothing aroma, and sprinkled powdered sugar into a small, white bowl, ready to dust over the golden squares. When the waffle was done, crisp at the edges and tender at the center, she placed it on a plate and sifted sugar over it in a soft snow. Then she brought the plate and the pot of tea to Marco's table, setting them down with a gentle smile. "For the taxi driver who chases the night," she said, "this one is for warmth and steadiness. The road can wait while you eat." Marco looked down at the waffle, the powdered sugar lying like fresh snow on hills and valleys. He picked up the fork, cut a small piece, and tasted it. The outside was delicately crisp, giving way to a soft interior that held the warmth of the iron and the sweetness of vanilla. He chewed slowly, savoring, feeling the flavor spread through his mouth and then down into his chest, where it seemed to loosen something tight. He swallowed, took a sip of tea, and closed his eyes for a brief, grateful moment. "You've been driving a long time," Elise said, not as a question, but as a simple observation. He nodded, opening his eyes again. "Feels like forever some nights," he replied quietly. "People in, people out. Some talk, some don't. I take them where they need to go, and then..." He made a small, vague gesture, hand turning palm up. "Then it's just me and the road again. Lights, lines on the asphalt, the radio, flat routes on a map, always moving, but sometimes I'm not sure toward what." Elise listened, her hands folded softly on the table. She did not interrupt, did not rush to fill the silence. When he fell quiet, she tilted her head slightly, and her gaze drifted toward the window, where the snow fell in quiet curtains of silver. "My grandmother used to say that some people are followed by the moon," she remarked after a moment. "Not everyone, just a few. They are the ones who spend their lives in motion, carrying others, guiding them, helping them cross from one place to another. The moon watches them," she said. "It rides along, just to be sure they are not too alone. Marco gave a small huff of breath that might have been amusement. "The moon," he said. "Sometimes it does feel like it's following me. When I was a kid, my father drove an old car. We used to take long trips to visit my aunt in the country. I remember staring out the back window and thinking the moon was chasing us, like it wanted to see where we were going." Elise's smile deepened, as if she had been waiting for him to say exactly that. "Perhaps," she said softly, "it was not chasing you at all. Perhaps it was keeping you company. Would you like to hear a story about that?" He hesitated, surprised by how much he wanted to say yes. Then he nodded. "Sure," he murmured. "I've got a little time before the next fair. Might as well give the moon a story to listen to." So she began, in her low, even voice, weaving her words into the warm air of the bakery. She spoke of a boy who rode in the back of his father's car on winter nights, watching the moon appear and disappear behind buildings and trees. She described the soft glow that seemed to follow them down highways and through small towns, always just at the corner of his eye. In her story, the moon was not distant and cold, but gentle and quiet, curious about the boy who spent so many hours watching the world through glass. It did not rush ahead or lag behind. It simply kept pace, content to shine on his journey. As the boy grew older, Elise said, her gaze resting on the steam rising from the teapot, he learned to drive. He took the wheel his father once held, and other people sat in the back seat, watching the world pass by. Some were happy, some were sad, some were lost in thought. He drove them through nights of rain and fog, through busy streets and empty ones. And always, when he looked in the rearview mirror, he found the moon there, not chasing, just there, a soft, constant companion made of silver light. Marco stared into his cup. He could hear his own younger self in the story, see the smudged shape of his father's face in the reflection of the windshield, feel the old seat fabric under his hands. He remembered those trips, the smell of coffee in the front and mint candies in the glove compartment, the way the headlights carved their path ahead. And yes, he remembered the moon, hovering and sliding in the dark sky, a silent, glowing presence that somehow made the long drives feel less lonely. He had never told anyone about it. It had seemed too small, too childish. Yet here it was, returned to him as a gentle tale in a warm, quiet bakery. In my grandmother's story, Elise continued, the boy eventually realized that he was never driving alone. Not really. The moon was always there, watching over the roads he traveled, the people he carried, the choices he made. It could not steer for him, but it could light the edges of the clouds, the surface of rivers, the roofs of sleeping houses. It turned the night into something more than darkness, into something soft, and whenever he felt lost, he only had to glance up or into the mirror to see that calm, silver face and remember that the world was wider than the road in front of him, but that he was part of that wide world and cared for by it. Silence settled again, but it was a different sort of silence now, full and peaceful. Marco finished his waffle, each bite warming him from the inside, and let the story sink into the corners of his mind that had long been cramped with schedules and fares. Outside the window, the snowflakes seemed to drift more slowly, catching the light in ways he had not noticed before. For the first time in a long while, he felt no urgency to be back on the road. The city could manage for a few more minutes without him. The passengers could wait for another driver. Tonight, there was time to sit and breathe and feel the steady presence of the night around him. When he finally rose to leave, buttoning his jacket and wrapping his scarf, he felt as if something had shifted subtly, not dramatically, not in a way that would show on his face, but in the quiet weight of his heart. He turned to Elise and met her eyes. "Maybe the moon has been kinder to me than I thought," he said softly. "Maybe it's not just watching the roads. Maybe it's watching me." Elise inclined her head, her expression serene. "I think it is," she replied. "And tonight, when you drive, its light will be softer because you have rested here. May your routes be gentle and your passengers peaceful." The bell chimed as he stepped back into the night. The cold touched his face, but it felt fresher now, less sharp. He walked back to his taxi, the snow whispering beneath his boots, and glanced up at the sky. There, behind a thin veil of cloud, he could see a pale, muted disk, the moon, watching, patient and quiet. As he started the engine and pulled away from the curb, he checked his side mirror out of old habit. The moon hung there, just at the edge of the glass, silver and still, following him down Snowfall Street. This time, he did not feel chased. He felt accompanied, and somewhere behind him, the candle in the bakery window burned steadily on, a small golden echo of the moon's gentle light. By the time Clara found herself on Snowfall Street, the night had already wrapped the city in a deep, silvery quiet. She had not meant to come here. Her feet had simply carried her along, away from the apartment that did not feel like hers anymore, away from the boxes still half packed and the sharp, echoing silence of rooms that had once been filled with shared laughter. The snow fell in a slow and steady curtain, soft flakes landing on her hat and coat, melting into tiny shining drops at the edges. Street lamps glowed with a faint golden hush, their light pooling on the cobblestones like spilled honey. Her breath rose in gentle clouds before her, disappearing into the calm air as she walked, hands tucked deep into her pockets, shoulders drawn slightly in against the cold and against her own thoughts. She did not notice the bakery at first. Her eyes were turned inward, watching the flickering images of the day, the final signatures on the papers, the careful politeness of voices that once had been familiar and warm, the way the door had closed behind her with a sound that seemed too loud. What she felt was not a storm of anger, but a slow, heavy ache, like the dull throb after tears have run dry. She did not want to talk to anyone, did not want to explain, did not want to hear the word sorry one more time. She wanted only to walk somewhere that was not full of memories, to feel the snow on her cheeks and the night around her, to be, for a little while, simply a figure moving through the soft winter air. It was the candle in the window that finally caught her eye. A small, steady flame in a blue glass holder glowing gently against the glass, like a quiet greeting. Above it, a sign painted in delicate script read La Boulangerie de Minuit, and through the window she could see warm light, wooden tables, and the faint outline of someone moving, pale and calm. The sight slipped into her awareness like a soft hand on her arm. She slowed without meaning to, her steps shortening, until she was standing just outside the door, the snow gathering lightly on her shoulders. For a moment, she hesitated. The thought of stepping into any place where there might be questions tugged at her, but the warmth behind the glass was too inviting, and the night felt suddenly too long and too quiet to spend entirely alone. She pushed the door open. The bell above it chimed with its soft, silver sound, and the cold air followed her in for a breath before being gently pressed back by the warmth. Inside, the bakery smelled of sugar and spice and something citrus bright. The light was low and golden, picking out the honey tones in the wooden floor and the soft curves of the chairs. The sound of the street faded behind her as the door closed, replaced by the slow, soothing tick of a clock and the faint, contented hum of the ovens. Clara stood just inside, fingers still clutched in the pockets of her coat, as if she needed one more moment to decide whether to stay. Madame Elise looked up from behind the counter, where she had been arranging a tray of gingerbread figures. Her gaze took in the shadows under Clara's eyes, the way her scarf was slightly uneven, the tight line of her mouth as if holding words back. She saw the weariness there, a different kind of tiredness from Lena's and Marco's, a weariness not of the body but of the heart. "Welcome," she said in her gentle, even voice. "You're safe from the snow in here, and from the wind, and from the day." She did not ask how Clara was. She did not ask why she had come. She simply offered a small, understanding smile, like the soft glow of a lamp left on in a quiet room. Clara swallowed, the scent of spices rising around her and stirring memories she had not expected. Ginger, orange, a hint of clove smells that belonged to winter kitchens and holidays long past. "I saw the light," she said, her voice coming out a little hoarse. "I was just walking. I won't stay long." "You may stay as long as you need," Elise replied. "There is a seat by the window where the snow falls in slow motion. It is very good for hearts that wish to rest without talking too much." She nodded toward a small table near the front, where a clear view of Snowfall Street lay framed like a painting. Clara nodded, almost despite herself, and moved toward the table. She unwound her scarf and draped it over the back of the chair, then sat carefully, still holding herself a little stiffly, as if afraid that if she relaxed, something inside might break. Through the glass, the night outside looked calmer from here, the flakes swirling softly in the lamplight, the cobblestones wearing a blanket of white that smoothed out all their rough edges. It felt as if she had stepped into a pause between moments, a small pocket of time where nothing demanded anything of her. Madame Elise turned to her shelves and reached for a particular tin where the gingerbread waited. She chose several pieces with care, small hearts, stars, and a simple round biscuit pressed with a subtle snowflake pattern. On the stove, she warmed water and prepared a pot of orange-spiced tea, its steam carrying the scent of dried peel and gentle spices into the air. The fragrance mingled with the sweetness of the gingerbread, creating a comforting, familiar cloud around her. When everything was ready, she placed the biscuits on a small plate decorated with a ring of painted holly leaves and carried it along with the teapot and a cup to Clara's table. "For you," she said softly, setting them down. "Gingerbread to warm you from the inside, and orange tea to brighten the edges of the night. It is a good combination for those who are between old chapters and new ones, even if they are not ready to name them yet." Clara looked at the plate, at the little shapes dusted with a light sparkle of sugar, and something tugged at her chest. "It smells like my grandmother's kitchen," she murmured before she could stop herself. "She used to bake gingerbread at Christmas. We'd help cut out the shapes. My hands were always sticky." She gave a small, startled half-smile, as if surprised that the memory had come so easily, slipping past the wall she had built around herself. "Then your grandmother is here a little too," Elise replied. "Memories travel on scents and steam. They know how to find their way back to us." She sat down at the empty chair across from Clara, resting her hands lightly on the table. "If you would like, I can tell you a story to go with the gingerbread. You do not have to answer questions or share more than you wish. You can simply listen." Clara hesitated, her fingers curling around the cup as she poured the tea. The warm liquid moved in a smooth amber stream, and the rising steam brushed her face with a soft, fragrant kiss. She brought the cup close, inhaled deeply, and felt a little of the tension in her shoulders melt. "A story sounds. All right," she said quietly. "As long as it's not too sad." Elise's smile was calm and reassuring. "It is a story about something that breaks," she said, "but it is also about how it can be mended, gently, piece by piece." She waited for Clara's small nod, then began to speak in her low, soothing voice, letting the words unfold like a slow, steady snowfall. "Once, in a small village tucked between snowy hills, there was a bell tower that stood at the very center of the square," she said. "The bell was old and beautiful, and in winter, especially at Christmas, its sound was like warm light poured into the cold air. People said that when the bell rang, even the snowflakes seemed to listen. Families gathered their children at the windows, and the sound wrapped around the houses like a soft blanket. It had rung for births and weddings, for holidays and quiet Sundays, for so many years that no one could remember the village without it." Clara picked up a piece of gingerbread, a small heart, and took a cautious bite. The biscuit was soft but held its shape, the spices gentle and comforting. As she chewed, the story rose around her, mingling with the taste, with the warmth of the tea, with the soft glow of the lamps. "But one winter," Elise continued, "a great storm came. The wind was wild and restless, and heavy snow weighed on the roofs. The villagers stayed inside, fires burning bright in their hearths, listening to the storm's roar. During the night, when no one was watching, the bell tower shuddered under the weight of the wind. A crack, just a small one, ran through the metal of the bell. No one heard it then, but the next morning, when the storm had passed and the sky was pale and clear, they tried to ring the bell for the first day of Christmas. Instead of a full, warm chime, it gave a broken, uneven sound, like a sigh cut short. And then, with one more stroke, the bell split, its pieces tumbling down with a dull, sorrowful clang. Clara's throat tightened a little at the image. She imagined the villagers standing in the square, faces turned up, hearing the sound of something beloved breaking. It felt too close, too familiar, but Elise's voice did not sharpen or rush. It remained calm and steady, as gentle as the steam rising from the tea. For a while, she said, the people simply stood and looked at the broken pieces. Some wept quietly, others turned away. A few said that a new bell would be needed, something modern and strong, cast in a distant city and brought in on a cart. But one old woman, who had lived in the village all her life, shook her head. "This bell has heard all our stories," she said. "It has carried our joys and our sorrows. You cannot replace that with something new and shiny. We must mend it, not quickly, not perfectly, but with care." Clara took another sip of tea, feeling the warmth move down into the hollow place inside her. The idea of mending something broken, of refusing to simply replace it, tugged at her. "Can you even mend a bell?" she asked softly, more to herself than to Elise. "In the story, they could," Elise replied. "Not in the way a blacksmith might, with fire and tools. They decided to mend it together in their own way." The villagers gathered the pieces, each one heavy and cold, and brought them into the warmest hall in the village. They cleaned them gently, wiping away the dust and the marks from the fall. They did not try to hide the cracks. They traced them with their fingers, acknowledging each one. And the old woman said, "Now we will give back to the bell what it has given to us." Elise paused, watching Clara's face as she listened, the lines of tension softening just a little. "They took turns," she went on. "Each person stepped forward with a small token, a ribbon from a wedding, a sprig of evergreen from a funeral, a piece of lace from a christening gown, a scrap of cloth from a beloved old coat. They pressed these tokens into the cracks and seams, not to make them disappear, but to honor them. They whispered their memories into the metal moments of joy, of comfort, of being held by the bell's sound. Slowly, the bell was bound back together, not with invisible repairs, but with a patchwork of love. When they hoisted it again into the tower, it looked different. You could see the lines where it had broken. It bore its history openly. "And did it ring again?" Clara asked, her voice even quieter now. Her fingers rested on the edge of the plate, crumbs of gingerbread scattered like tiny fragments of something once whole. "Yes," Elise said. On Christmas night, they gathered in the square, hearts beating with a mix of hope and fear. When the bell rang, the sound was not the same as before. It was softer, perhaps, and there was a faint, wavering note in it, like a tremor. But it was also deeper, richer, full of all the hands that had touched it and all the memories that had been poured into its cracks. The villagers said that the sound felt like being held by many arms at once. It was no longer a perfect bell. It was something else, something mended, something honest, and they loved it even more. The bakery fell quiet for a moment after she finished. The only sounds the ticking of the clock and the soft murmur of the ovens. Outside, the snow continued to fall, laying its gentle silver cover over roofs and streets and the bell towers of distant churches. Clara sat very still, her eyes lowered, the story shimmering inside her like light on water. Something in her, something that had felt shattered, recognized itself in that bell that had broken and yet been gathered, touched, and patiently pieced together. "I don't feel very much like a bell right now," she said at last, attempting a small smile. "More like a pile of shards in a cold hall." Elise's gaze was tender. "That is where mending begins," she answered. "Not in pretending you are still whole, but in allowing yourself to be gathered. Not all at once, not quickly, piece by piece, with warmth, with time, with gentle hands, sometimes your own, sometimes those of others, sometimes the hands of simple things like gingerbread and snow and quiet nights." Clara looked up, and their eyes met. In Elise's calm face, she saw no pity, only a steady, peaceful kindness that did not demand anything of her. She let out a slow breath she had not known she was holding. The ache in her chest did not vanish, but it eased, its edges softening as if wrapped in felt. She reached for another piece of gingerbread, and this time, when she bit into it, she actually tasted the sweetness, the hint of orange, the soft give of the biscuit between her teeth. When she finally rose to leave, the teapot was empty and only crumbs remained on the plate. She wrapped her scarf around her neck and slipped on her coat. At the door, she turned back. "Thank you," she said, the words simple but full. "For the tea and for the bell." Elise nodded. "Come back whenever the cracks feel too sharp," she replied gently. "There will be gingerbread, and the snow will be waiting to listen. Even broken bells ring beautifully in winter." Clara stepped out into the night. The air was cool and soft, the snowflakes landing on her cheeks like tiny, cold kisses. As she walked down Snowfall Street, the world felt a little less empty, the sky above not quite so far away. Behind her, in the bakery window, the candle flame burned steadily, a small golden heart in the quiet, silver night. And though her own heart was still tender and bruised, she carried with her the image of a bell that had cracked and been mended, its sound deeper, truer, and somehow more beautiful than before. On some nights, the city felt to Hugo like an enormous sleeping creature, its breath rising and falling in the faint glow of windows left on and the distant hum of traffic. He walked along its quiet veins with his mailbag slung across his shoulder, boots pressing light tracks into the snow, the soft rustle of paper following him like a whisper. He was a night postman, a carrier of messages that had taken too long to arrive, or had never quite found their place. On this particular evening, the snow had begun early and had not stopped, wrapping the streets in a pale, muffled stillness. Hugo's cap was dusted with white, his scarf damp at the edges, and his gloved hands were slightly numb from sorting letters in cold hallways and vestibules. He did not complain. He had grown used to the quiet company of envelopes and stamps, their mute secrets pressed between thin sheets of paper. Yet there were nights, like this one, when the weight of the unsent and the returned settled more heavily in his bag, as if the words inside the letters had turned to small, silent stones. He turned down Snowfall Street almost without thinking, his route having curved and twisted through many neighborhoods. The street's name suited it tonight more than ever. Snow drifted from the sky in continuous, gentle folds, cloaking the branches of the trees and smoothing the rooftops into soft, rounded shapes. Light from the lamps stretched out in delicate puddles, illuminating the flakes as they fell, each one glinting for a moment before joining the white hush below. Hugo's breath rose before him in slow clouds, and his steps naturally slowed, drawn into the peaceful pace of the night. In his bag, a handful of letters marked with careful stamps, redirections, and the small, quiet phrase, "Return to sender," shifted against his side. These were the letters that had not arrived where they were meant to go, that had bounced back along invisible paths of ink and intention, circling the city like lost birds. He paused under a lamp to adjust the strap of his bag, the leather warm and familiar under his glove. As he did, his gaze drifted ahead, and he saw the warm, golden rectangle of a window near the end of the street. A candle burned in blue glass, steady and inviting, and behind it, he could see the soft glow of interior lamps and the indistinct shapes of tables and chairs. Above the door, in delicate script, the sign read La Boulangerie de Minuit. Hugo had passed it once or twice before on his routes, always with a bundle of flyers or a handful of bills for the address. He had never gone inside. The night had always seemed to press him onward toward mailboxes still waiting. But tonight, his bag was lighter than usual, except for the stubborn weight of the returned letters. His shift was almost over, and his shoulders ached pleasantly from the miles he had walked. The thought of a warm room, of light, and the smell of baking tugged at him gently, like a small hand on the sleeve. He hesitated only a moment longer before turning toward the door. The bell chimed with its soft, silvery note as he stepped inside, letting in a faint swirl of cold air that carried with it the scent of snow and city stone. Then the door closed again, and the warmth of the bakery folded around him, gentle and complete. The air smelled of vanilla and sugar and something creamy and delicate. Light fell in golden pools across the wooden floor, touching the edges of chairs and the polished surface of the counter. The ticking of a clock filled the room with a slow, steady rhythm, as if marking time in deeper, calmer breaths than the ones outside. Madame Elise looked up from where she stood behind the counter, arranging small custard tarts in a neat, inviting circle. She saw at once the mailbag slung across Hugo's shoulder, the faint dents on his cap from the brim being pulled down against the wind, the way his fingers flexed slightly as if still sorting envelopes in the air. She noticed, too, the careful, almost apologetic way he stepped over the threshold, as if afraid that his presence might disturb the soft quiet of the room. "Good evening," she said, her voice warm and calm. "You carry the city's words, I see. Come in and rest. The letters can sleep for a while without you." Hugo gave a small, shy nod, removing his cap and brushing some snow from its brim. His hair underneath was flattened, a few strands clinging to his forehead. He glanced around, taking in the cozy space, the gentle light, the faint sparkle of sugar on the pastries in the glass case. "Good evening," he murmured. "I hope I'm not too late. I finished my route, more or less, or at least the part that matters." His hand touched the flap of his bag unconsciously, where the returned letters rested. "You're right on time," Elise replied. "The night is still very young for those who walk its quiet paths. There is a seat there by the side wall, where the light is soft and the shadows are gentle. Sit, if you'd like. I have vanilla custard tarts fresh from the oven and warm milk if you enjoy something simple and sweet." Hugo felt something loosen in his chest at the words simple and sweet. His days were filled with complicated addresses, with numbers and codes and names that tangled together in his mind. The idea of something uncomplicated, a custard tart and warm milk, felt like a blessing. "That sounds nice," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." He moved to the indicated table and lowered his bag carefully to the floor, as if not wanting to jostle the letters inside. He sat down slowly, feeling his muscles acknowledge the rest, and placed his cap on the table beside him. Through the window, he could see Snowfall Street, the snow still tumbling softly through the lamplight, tire tracks filling in almost as soon as they were made. At the counter, Elise lifted one of the custard tarts from the tray, its golden, flaky crust cradling a pale, smooth filling that trembled very slightly. She poured a mug of warm milk, frothing it just enough to make a thin, velvety layer on top, and added a small drizzle of honey that curled into the foam like a golden ribbon. The scent that rose up was light and soothing, a gentle comfort rather than a rich indulgence. She placed the tart on a delicate plate with a painted border of pale blue flowers and carried it, with the milk, to Hugo's table. "For the postman of midnight letters," she said as she set them down. "Vanilla for calm, milk for softness. They are very good companions for a tired mind." Her eyes flickered briefly to the bag at his feet, especially when it carries words that have not yet found their place. He followed her gaze and gave a slight, rueful smile. "Yes," he admitted, "these are the ones that come back. Wrong address. Moved away. No such person. Sometimes, no explanation at all. Just a red stamp and a journey in circles." He lifted the mug and took a careful sip. The milk was warm, but not too hot, the honey adding a soft, floral sweetness that rested gently on his tongue. It slid down his throat like a smooth thread, untying little knots of tension in his chest. "Sometimes it feels strange," he went on, "to carry so many messages that never arrive. As if I'm walking with pockets full of unsaid things." Elise sat in the chair opposite him, her hands folded lightly. "Perhaps they are not unsaid," she suggested softly. "Perhaps they are simply rerouted. Words have a way of traveling by paths we cannot see. They may not reach the address on the envelope, but they may still find their way to where they are needed." Her gaze turned briefly toward the window, where snowflakes fluttered against the glass. "Would you like to hear a story about that?" Hugo hesitated, then nodded. He cut a small piece of the custard tart and brought it to his mouth. The crust was tender and crisp at once, and the filling was smooth, cool at the center, scented with vanilla that was more gentle than sweet. He tasted a hint of lemon, just enough to brighten the cream. As he chewed, the warmth of the milk and the softness of the pastry combined, spreading a quiet ease through his body. "Yes," he said after a moment, "I think I would like that. When I was a child," Elise began, her voice flowing into the space between them like a slow, clear stream. "My grandmother used to tell me that snowflakes are like letters from the earth to the sky. Each one carries a tiny, silent message, sometimes a wish, sometimes a memory, sometimes a feeling too delicate for words. When people look up at the snow and say nothing, she believed that the snow understands them anyway. Their unspoken thoughts rise into the cold air, and the snowflakes gather them gently, carrying them as they fall." Hugo listened, his eyes drifting toward the window. The snow outside seemed to change as she spoke, as if each flake moved with new purpose, no longer just cold crystals, but small, attentive messengers. He imagined his own quiet thoughts, all the things he never said out loud on his night walks, floating between his lips and the sky, caught in the delicate arms of the falling snow. In her story, Elise continued, "The snow does not keep these messages. It delivers them, not to houses or to numbered streets, but to the stars. You see, the stars are very old and very patient. They shine over streets and villages, over oceans and mountains, and they hear many prayers, many wishes, many sighs. But sometimes things rise from the earth so softly that even the stars cannot quite catch them. So the snowflakes help. They rise again in the cold morning light, becoming mist, becoming clouds, carrying the messages higher and higher until the stars can hear them clearly. The stars hold them very gently and answer in ways we may not always recognize. A kinder mood in a stranger, a sudden sense of peace when we wake, a path lit a little more brightly than we expected." Hugo thought of the letters in his bag, the ones addressed to people who had moved away, or to names that no longer lived at the address written in careful ink. They seemed, suddenly, less like failed attempts and more like part of a larger, quieter conversation. So even messages that never arrive are heard? He asked. "In their own way," Elise replied. Words written and sealed and sent carry a piece of the sender's heart, even when the envelope returns, faintly creased, with its red markings and official stamps. The act of writing remains. Something has left the heart and taken shape. My grandmother said that those unreceived letters leave a trace in the air. They are carried by small currents, like the ones that move petals in water. They might not reach the eyes they were meant for, but they might still soften a corner of the world. A thought that could not be spoken becomes a kindness offered to a stranger. A goodbye unsent becomes a gentle letting go, felt only by the one who wrote it, but echoed far beyond. He sat quietly with that idea, turning it over like a small, smooth stone in his mind. The custard tart was half gone, the plate scattered with a few golden crumbs. The milk in his mug had cooled slightly, the foam settling into a thin white ring. He looked down at his mailbag, and for the first time in a long while, felt less like he was carrying failures and more like he was holding delicate, unfinished stories, all of them still capable of becoming something gentle. I've always thought of myself as invisible, I guess, Hugo admitted softly. People see the uniform, the bag. They nod, they sign their names, they close the door. They rarely look at my face for long. I'm just the one who delivers what matters, not someone who matters in himself. But listening to you talk, it feels a bit different, as if I'm walking with all these small wishes and thoughts that might not have anywhere obvious to go, but still deserve to be carried gently. Elise's eyes warmed. You are the guardian of those wishes, she said, even the ones that turn back. Your steps through the snow trace paths, not only for parcels and bills, but for the quiet hopes people tuck between lines of ink. That is no small thing. The stars may be far away, but they see the way you walk. Outside, the snow fell more softly, each flake joining the growing blanket on rooftops and railings, smoothing out every sharp corner and rough edge. The street lamps shone steadily, their light reflected on the snow in a soft, silver glow. Inside the bakery, the air was calm and sweet, the ovens humming like contented lullabies, the clock ticking in peaceful measure. Hugo felt his shoulders sink lower, the tension draining from his neck and wrists. The long lines of streets and addresses in his mind blurred, not harshly, but into a gentle, glowing map of places where people lived and loved and waited, all under the same sky. When at last he rose to leave, he felt lighter in a way he could not quite explain. The mailbag still held the returned letters, but they no longer weighed on him as they had before. He thanked Elise quietly, his voice steadier, and reached for his cap. At the door, he paused and looked back. Maybe, he said softly, I'll think of the snow as my helper from now on, for all the messages I can't deliver. Elise nodded, her smile calm and sure. The snow is very good at listening, she replied, and the stars are very good at keeping secrets. Walk gently, Hugo. The night is full of letters you cannot see, and you carry them well. He stepped out into the silver hush of Snowfall Street. The air was cool and clean, the snowflakes brushing his cheeks like soft, fleeting kisses. As he walked, each footstep left a mark that would soon be covered again. Yet, in that brief moment, he felt connected to the wide, quiet city around him. Above, the sky stretched deep and dark, sprinkled with distant stars that winked faintly through veils of cloud and snow. Hugo tightened his scarf, adjusted the strap of his bag, and continued down the street, feeling no longer unseen, but quietly accompanied by 1,000 tiny messengers, rising and falling in the gentle dance between earth and sky. On some nights, the snow seemed to fall just a little quieter, as if it were listening for footsteps that did not quite dare to come closer. This was one of those nights. Snowfall Street lay under a soft, white blanket that smoothed out every sharp edge and softened every sound. The lamps stood like patient guardians, their halos of pale light drifting into the silver air. The trees along the pavement wore delicate caps of snow, their bare branches traced in white against a deep, velvety sky. Inside the bakery, the lights were low and golden, and the ovens breathed a steady, gentle warmth. The candle in the blue glass at the window burned softly, its small flame leaning now and then as if bowing to the snowflakes that brushed the glass. The clock ticked in its calm rhythm, and Madame Elise moved in unhurried circles, tending to trays and cups, as comfortable in the hush as a bird in a nest. It was in this quiet that she noticed him, a thin shape hovering just beyond the glow of the window, a shadow that moved and then stilled. At first, she saw only the blur of a dark jacket and the pale oval of a face turned toward the glass. Then, as her eyes adjusted, she saw a boy of perhaps 14 or 15, his hair flattened with melted snow under the hood of his coat, his hands hidden deep in his pockets. His shoulders were hunched, not from the cold so much as from something heavier resting inside. He stood very close to the window, looking in, not with the eager curiosity of a child pressing to see pastries, but with the hesitant gaze of someone standing on the edge of a threshold and unsure if they were allowed to cross it. On the glass before him, his breath had fogged a small circle, and he drew slow, absent-minded lines in it with the tip of one finger, as if that small act of making patterns could keep him there a little longer. Madame Elise watched him for a moment from the gentle shadows behind the counter. She recognized the particular stillness in the way he held himself, the pause of someone who did not want to go back the way they had come, but who also did not know where else to go. It was a different kind of tiredness than the weary limbs of nurses and drivers, or the inward ache of the newly divorced. This was the fatigue of a young heart that had listened to too many loud words and did not know what to do with them. She wiped her hands slowly on her apron, smoothing flour from the fabric, and then walked to the door, her steps making only the faintest whisper on the wooden floor. When she opened the door, the bell chimed softly, and a small gust of cold air leaned in, bringing with it the crisp scent of snow and the thin, distant echoes of the city. The boy, startled, pulled slightly back from the window, his hand freezing in midair over the lines he had traced in the fog. He turned toward her, eyes wide at first, then quickly guarded, as if expecting a question, or worse, a reprimand. "You don't have to stand in the cold," Elise said, her voice as calm and gentle as the falling snow. "There is room inside, and the chairs do not ask questions. Come in and warm up, if you like. The night is long, but it can be kinder from the other side of the glass." He hesitated, glancing past her into the soft light of the bakery, then back down at his boots, where snow clung in little clumps to the laces. "I was just looking," he muttered. "I didn't mean to bother anyone. I'm fine." The word "fine" sounded brittle, like a thin sheet of ice over deep water. "The snow doesn't seem to think you are bothering it," Elise replied, a faint smile touching her lips. "It's landing on your shoulders quite happily, and the chairs inside are very patient. They like to hold people who are just looking for a little while. As for being fine, sometimes fine needs a warm drink and something sweet before it can really mean what it says." She stepped back from the doorway, opening it wider so that the warmth and the golden light could spill around him like a quiet invitation. There was a small silence, filled with the whisper of snow and the soft ticking of the clock inside. Then, as if something inside him had loosened by a fraction, the boy nodded once. "Just for a bit," he said under his breath, as much to himself as to her. He stepped forward, crossing the threshold, the bell chiming again in a delicate, welcoming note as the door closed gently behind him. The warmth of the bakery folded around him at once, wrapping his chilled hands and face in its tender embrace. He pushed back his hood, revealing dark hair flattened in places by dampness, a few strands sticking up at odd angles. His cheeks were pink from the cold, and his eyes, a clear twilight sort of brown, held shadows that did not belong to his age. He stood there for a second, unsure of where to go, like a bird that had flown in through an open window and hadn't yet chosen a place to land. "You can sit there," Elise said, nodding toward a table near one of the side walls, where the light fell softly and the shadows were gentle. "It's a good place for those who need to catch their breath." As he moved toward it, she added, "My name is Elise. I run this place at night. You don't have to tell me yours unless you wish. You don't have to talk at all if you'd rather not. You can just sit and watch the snow rest on the trees." He slid into the chair, his movements careful, as if he were afraid of taking up too much space. "I'm Noah," he said after a moment, as though offering something small but real. "I was just, walking." He stared at the table's surface, tracing the faint grain of the wood with his gaze. "Welcome, Noah," she replied simply. "Tonight, you are one of the night walkers. They are always welcome here." She glanced toward the baker's shelves and then back to him. "Would you like something warm to eat? I have sugared brioche fresh from the oven. They are soft and a little sweet, good for when the day has been too loud." He nodded again, this time more readily. "That sounds good," he admitted. "I didn't really eat dinner." He did not explain why. The words hung unspoken in the air, but they did not have sharp edges here. Elise moved to the counter, where a tray of brioche sat cooling under a light cloth. She lifted the cloth, and the scent of butter and sugar rose up in a comforting wave. Each brioche was a small, golden hill, its surface lightly dusted with white crystals that gleamed under the lamps like tiny, captured snowflakes. She chose one and placed it on a plate, then poured a mug of warm milk, adding a spoonful of honey and stirring until the sweetness dissolved into the creamy warmth. When she brought the plate and mug to Noah, she set them down with the care one gives to something fragile and valuable. For the boy who needed to walk a little longer, she said, "Brioche for softness, milk for calm. They're good companions for thoughts that are not ready to be spoken." Noah's fingers curled around the warm mug, and he exhaled slowly, as if he had been holding his breath for hours. He waited a moment before lifting the brioche, feeling its delicate weight in his hand, then tore off a small piece. The crumb was tender, yielding easily, and when he put it in his mouth, it tasted of butter and sugar and a faint, comforting vanilla. He chewed slowly, as though he had forgotten what it felt like to eat something made purely to comfort, not to fill a hurried gap between tasks. The milk followed, warm and sweet, sliding down into the hollow place in his chest and resting there. They sat in a soft silence for a while. The ovens hummed quietly. The clock ticked its gentle rhythm. Outside, the snow drifted steadily down, covering the last traces of the evening's footsteps. Elise did not ask him why he was out so late, or why he hadn't eaten dinner, or what kind of words had been thrown about in the place he didn't wish to return to just yet. Those questions hovered on the edge of the air, but she let them pass, as one lets a breeze move through an open window. Instead, when she finally spoke, her words were directed not at Noah's history, but at the night itself. "When I was young," she said, her voice low and steady, "my grandmother used to tell me a story about a small bird that lived in a very noisy forest. Would you like to hear it?" She looked at him not with expectation, but with a quiet offering. Noah kept his eyes on his brioche for a moment, then glanced up. There was caution there, but also a flicker of curiosity. "A noisy forest?" he asked, a faint, wry note in his voice. "Sounds familiar." After a small pause, he added, "Yeah, I don't mind. I can listen." Elise nodded and folded her hands on the table. "In this forest," she began, "there were many tall trees and many, many birds. The branches were always full of sound calls and songs and arguments, wings beating, leaves rustling. During the day, it could feel overwhelming, even for a bird. One little bird with soft gray feathers and very bright eyes often felt as though the noise was too much. The others argued about nests and twigs and who had the best branch. They shouted over each other, and even the wind seemed to push through the trees too roughly. The little bird tried to sing sometimes, but its song was small and got lost in the shouting. So, whenever the noise grew too loud, it would slip away, flying quietly between trunks, looking for a place where the air was gentler. Noah's shoulders eased a fraction. He took another bite of brioche, the buttery sweetness grounding him as the story rose around him like a soft, steady wind. He imagined the chaos of the forest, the flurry of wings, the overlapping cries. It was not so different from slammed doors and raised voices, from television sounds competing with ringing phones and words that left no room for answers. One winter evening, Elise continued, a storm came to the forest. The wind howled through the branches, shaking the trees. Snow fell quickly, coating nests and bending twigs. The bigger birds shouted loudly, trying to be heard over the storm, blaming one another for the breaking branches and the cold. The little bird felt its heart race. The noise was louder than ever, and the storm made the forest feel like a place of chaos rather than shelter. So it did something it had never done before. It flew away not just to another tree, but out of the forest entirely. It flew until the noise of the other birds grew faint, until the trees thinned and the sky opened wider overhead. Did it get lost? Noah asked quietly, the question emerging before he could stop it. For a little while, Elise said gently. It flew through the snow, its wings tired, not sure where it was going. But then it saw, in the distance, a single bare tree standing at the edge of a frozen field. There were no other birds on its branches, no leaves to rustle, no voices to crowd the air. Only the soft sound of the wind moving through the twigs and the quiet whisper of snow landing on the ground. The little bird settled on one of the branches. At first, it felt strange. So much space, so much quiet. It could hear its own breathing, feel its own heartbeat. But slowly, the quiet began to feel like a blanket rather than a void. Noah leaned back in his chair, the mug of milk cradled in his hands. He could see the tree in his mind, dark against the silver field. The small bird resting on a branch, chest rising and falling. The image soothed him. The way watching the snow fall through the bakery window soothed him now. Did it stay there? He asked. For a while, Elise replied. Long enough for the storm in the forest to pass, and long enough for its wings to stop trembling. In that quiet, the little bird discovered something. It found that its own song was clearer when it was alone for a moment. Not louder, not grander, but clearer. It sang a small song into the night, a song made of the things it had seen and the way its heart felt when the wind was gentle. The stars above listened. The snow on the ground listened. Even the wind seemed to soften to hear. When the bird finished, the silence that followed was not empty, it was full and peaceful. Then, when it was ready, it flew back toward the forest. The other birds were still there, still talking and fluttering and arguing sometimes. But the little bird carried the memory of the quiet branch in its heart. It knew it could return to that quiet in its mind whenever the forest grew too loud again. The bakery was quiet now, except for the ticking clock and the soft breathing of the ovens. Outside, the snow continued to fall in a slow, steady drift, and the street lay still and peaceful beneath its silver blanket. Noah stared at the last piece of brioche on his plate, then slowly picked it up, feeling the story settle inside him like warm bread and milk. He thought of the apartment he had come from, of the voices raised not in cruelty, but in weariness and worry, words overlapping until they tangled. He thought of slammed doors and a television turned up too loud to drown out everything else. He had slipped away, walked out into the snow, not because he was in danger, but because he needed a branch where the air was gentler, where he could hear his own thoughts again. So the bird went back, he said eventually. It didn't just leave forever. No, Elise said softly. It didn't have to. The forest was still its home, but it learned that it was allowed to seek quiet, to rest on a calm branch until its heart was steady again. It learned that stepping away for a little while was not running away. It was taking care of its small, brave heart. And when it returned, it could listen without losing itself in the noise. Noah's eyes shone very faintly, though no tears fell. He finished his milk, feeling the warmth spread all the way to his fingers. When he stood at last, pulling his hood back up and zipping his coat, his posture was still slim, still a little tentative. But there was a new steadiness to the way he held his shoulders. "Thank you," he said, voice low, "for the brioche and the bird. I think I can go home now. Maybe the forest is a bit quieter by this hour." A flick of hesitant humor touched his mouth, like a small, shy bird stretching its wings. Elise nodded, her eyes kind and calm. "The night has a way of cooling hot words," she replied. "By now, many storms have tired themselves out. Walk slowly. The snow will soften your steps. And remember, even when the forest is loud, there is always a branch somewhere, waiting in your mind, where the wind is gentle and your song is your own." He gave a small nod, then turned toward the door. The bell chimed softly as he stepped out into the silver air. The snow met him with its quiet kiss on his cheeks, and the street seemed less like a path of escape and more like a calm space between here and home. Behind him, the candle in the bakery window glowed steadily, a tiny sun in blue glass. Ahead of him, the night spread wide and peaceful, and though his home might still hold echoes of raised voices, he carried within him the image of a single tree at the edge of a quiet field and a small bird resting gently on its branch. There were nights when the bakery was busy from the moment the clock chimed 10, when footsteps followed one another like a quiet procession through the snow, bringing nurses and drivers, postmen and wandering hearts to the warm light behind the glass. And there were nights like this one, when the street outside lay empty for a long time, and the only movement was the steady fall of snow and the soft sway of branches in the wind. Snowfall Street seemed almost to sleep, its houses dark and still, their roofs smoothed under layers of white. The sky above was a deep, velvety blue, but the clouds had thinned in places, allowing a few patient stars to appear, small and silver and steady. The snowflakes that drifted down caught the starlight as they fell, each one shining for a breath before melting into the blanket below. Inside the bakery, the warmth was soft and even, as if the room itself had curled up under an invisible quilt. The ovens glowed gently, breathing out heat that wrapped around the wooden floor and the tables and the shelves, making everything feel slow and peaceful. The lamps cast their golden circles of light, but left the corners in tender shadow, so that the room seemed to hold both night and day at once. In the window, the candle in the blue glass burned with a small, steady flame, its light rippling faintly whenever a draft of air slipped along the sill. The clock on the wall ticked its unhurried rhythm, each second flowing into the next like a drop of water into a quiet stream. Madame Elise moved through this stillness with the ease of someone in her own dream. The absence of customers did not unsettle her. She knew the rhythm of the night too well. Some evenings, the bakery needed to be a harbor for many, and some evenings, it needed simply to breathe and gather strength. She tied her pale blue apron a little tighter and rolled up her sleeves, the skin of her forearms pale against the soft wool of her cardigan. Her hair, threaded with silver, was pinned in its familiar loose knot, a few strands escaping to soften the lines of her face. Her expression was calm, focused, but it held a quiet light, as if she were listening to something only she could hear: the breath of the yeast, the sigh of the flour, the whisper of sugar dissolving into eggs and butter. On the long wooden work table at the back, bowls and jars were arranged like instruments in an orchestra, ready for her hands to guide them into harmony. A large mixing bowl waited, its interior shining faintly under an overhead lamp. Next to it, a jar of flour stood half full, its surface smooth and pale, like untouched snow on a rooftop. A small crock held sugar, crystals glinting softly in the light. There was a pitcher of milk, cool and faintly scented, and a dish of butter that had been left just long enough to soften to the perfect yielding texture. On a small plate, she had laid out spices: cinnamon bark, a pinch of nutmeg, a star of anise, each one smelling of winter nights and old stories. In a tiny jar, almost hidden, a few grains of something finer and more mysterious than sugar rested, like fragments of frost. Before she began, she walked to the wall where a small, carved shelf held a music box. It was old, the wood worn smooth by years of gentle touch, the metal crank slightly dulled. The lid was decorated with a painted winter scene: tiny trees under snow, a little house with light in its windows, a sky of silver dots for stars. Elise lifted the lid, and the mechanism inside gave a soft click. She turned the crank slowly, and then the music began, a simple, tender melody that sounded like a lullaby half remembered from childhood. Its notes floated through the bakery, mingling with the ticking of the clock and the quiet hum of the ovens, wrapping the air in another layer of calm. She often played it on empty nights. It helped the room to feel accompanied, and it reminded her of hands older than her own, guiding her through the first recipes, the first late hours, the first winter storms. Then she returned to the work table and reached for a thin, worn book that rested near the back wall. Its cover was dark and softened by years of use, the corners rounded, the spine creased. When she opened it, the pages revealed lines of careful writing in silver ink, the letters curling and flowing like small streams under moonlight. This was her secret recipe book, though to call it only a collection of recipes would have been to miss half its nature. It was also a map of hearts and nights and needs, a record of which pastries soothed which kinds of tiredness. Each page bore not just measurements and instructions, but small notes in the margins for those who have walked too long, for eyes that have watched over the sick, for hands that have let go of something precious, for young souls searching for a quiet branch. Some of those notes were in her own handwriting. Others, older and slightly shakier, belonged to her grandmother, whose silver ink had started the book many years ago. Tonight, her fingers brushed gently over a particular page where a recipe was marked with a small, drawn star. The title, written in both their hands, read, "Biscuits of Snow and Starlight." Beneath it, the subtitle her grandmother had once added glimmered faintly in the lamplight, "For wanderers who do not yet know what they are seeking." Elise smiled, the expression as soft as the light. It felt right to make these tonight, on a street so still, under a sky just beginning to show its stars. Perhaps no one would come to eat them. Perhaps the plates would remain untouched until dawn, and she would wrap the biscuits and send them out into the day. Or perhaps the night had kept a few souls in reserve, waiting until the biscuits were ready. She had long ago stopped trying to predict the patterns. She simply followed the quiet pull in her chest that told her which page to turn to. She measured the flour carefully, watching it fall like soft white rain into the bowl. The sugar followed, a pale glitter against the smoother white beneath. She added a pinch of salt, remembering her grandmother's murmured words, "Even in sweet things, a little salt, so that joy can feel the depth of life." The butter went in next, and she worked it gently with her fingers, rubbing it into the flour until the mixture resembled breadcrumbs, each piece small and even. The touch of the butter softened her hands. The coolness of the flour soothed her skin. She added milk, a trickle at a time, until the dough drew itself together, smooth and pliable, almost like snow gathered into a ball. To this, she added the spices, just a whisper of them, enough to scent the biscuits without making them loud. Finally, from the tiny jar, she sprinkled the mysterious grains her grandmother's legacy. Not magic in any sharp or dazzling sense, but something she thought of as concentrated kindness, gathered from many nights of listening, of holding hands, of quiet blessings whispered at the door as people left. As she kneaded the dough, turning and pressing and folding, the music box melody wound down and then faded into silence, leaving only the soft sound of her hands at work and the faint sigh of the building settling into the night. Outside, the snowflakes continued their gentle descent, riding the wind in slow spirals before landing on roofs and rails and branches. The stars, more numerous now, blinked peacefully above the drifting clouds. A long way off, perhaps, water moved under ice in some hidden river, but here the only water was in the pipes and in the small sink at the back, where a single drop fell now and then with a quiet, regular tap, like a tiny echo of the clock. Once the dough was ready, she rolled it out with a wooden pin that had belonged to her grandmother, the surface dusted with flour to keep it from sticking. The dough yielded easily, smooth under her hands, and she cut it into simple shapes with a round cutter. No stars, no hearts tonight, just small, round biscuits like pale moons. She arranged them on a baking tray lined with parchment, each one given a little space so it could rise and breathe. Before putting them in the oven, she took a soft brush and lightly glazed the tops with milk, then sprinkled a delicate veil of sugar over them. Under the light, the sugar crystals shimmered faintly, echoing the starlight outside. As the biscuits baked, their scent slowly filled the bakery a quiet aroma, not bold like cinnamon or ginger, but gentle, creamy, with a hint of something floral and faintly sweet, like the memory of vanilla in the air rather than its full presence. Elise moved through the room while they baked, tending to other small rituals. She checked the garlands of evergreen that hung along the walls, adjusting a branch here, tucking in a sprig of white berries there. The greenery brought the forest into the room, the deep, clean scent of needles mingling with the warmth of sugar and flour. On each table, she straightened the small glass jar that held a single winter flower, a white hellebore, or a sprig of baby's breath, its petals and tiny blossoms like snow preserved in bloom. She paused at the window, resting her fingertips lightly on the cool glass. From here, she could see the street stretching out in both directions, the tracks of earlier passers-by already softened and nearly covered. The lamplight shone on the snow, turning it to a field of soft silver, broken only by the dark trunks of trees and the gentle rise and fall of buried steps. Above, the stars seemed closer than usual, as if the snowy air had brought them down a little. She remembered other winters, other nights, standing at this same window with her grandmother beside her. She heard again the older woman's voice, low and sure, telling her that snow and stars were part of the same quiet language, the language of things that did not shout, but simply shone and fell, until the world felt soothed. "My dear," her grandmother had once said, "we do not heal people here by knowing their stories. That is their choice, to share them or not. We heal them, a little, by giving their hearts a place to rest." The snow and the stars do their part outside. Inside, we have flour and butter and sugar and thyme, and a little something more passed from hand to hand, from night to night. It is a simple recipe, really. Warmth, listening, patience, sweetness, and a steady light. The memory settled over Elise like a shawl. She smiled quietly and turned back to the ovens, where the biscuits had turned a light, gentle gold at the edges. She slid the tray out, and a soft cloud of fragrant steam rose up, curling around her face. The biscuits looked modest, almost plain, but there was a peacefulness in their shape, in their even rise, in the delicate shimmer of sugar on their tops. She set the tray on the counter to cool, the warmth radiating into the air in slow waves. For a while, the bakery existed in a kind of suspended moment. The biscuits cooling, the music box silent, the candle in the window burning with a quiet flame, the snow falling steadily outside, the stars watching from their great distance. It was a dreamlike pause, a breath held between one heartbeat and the next. No footsteps sounded on the street. No hands reached for the door. And yet Elise did not feel lonely. She felt as if the night itself were sitting with her, peaceful and companionable, sharing the stillness and the scent of baking. Eventually, she began to arrange the biscuits on a plate near the edge of the counter, each one placed with care in a circle, like a little constellation of pale moons. She poured herself a small cup of tea, fragrant and light, and stood behind the counter, hands wrapped around the warmth of the cup, eyes resting on the door. She knew that perhaps no one would come, and that would be all right. The biscuits could wait. The blessings baked into them would not vanish with the hours. They would simply grow softer, deeper, like spices melding in a jar. But the night, it seemed, had its own plans. Just as she finished her tea, she heard it the faintest crunch of footsteps on fresh snow, hesitant but real, approaching from somewhere down the street. The bell above the door, quiet for so long, gave a small anticipatory tremble, as if it had been listening too. Elise set down her cup and smoothed her apron, the calm, familiar gesture of someone ready to welcome whatever the snow and stars had chosen to send her way. The recipes had been written, the warmth prepared, the light kept steady. Outside, the silver flakes continued to fall. Inside, the secret book lay open on the table, its ink still shimmering softly, its pages filled with the quiet, enduring magic of flour, sugar, and care. On Christmas Eve, Snowfall Street seemed wrapped in a deeper softness, as if the night itself had drawn a thicker, gentler quilt over the city. The snow had begun falling before dusk and had not stopped, laying smooth, silver blankets over rooftops and cars, turning railings into pale lines and steps into rounded, muffled shapes. The sky above was a deep indigo, clouded yet faintly luminous, as though the stars were breathing behind the veil and letting their light seep through in a quiet, patient way. The lampposts along the street glowed like small, golden moons, each halo spreading out into the swirling flakes. The air was cold, but it was not harsh. It felt crisp and still, full of a hushed expectation that seemed to vibrate almost invisibly between the houses and the trees. Inside the bakery, the warmth was richer than ever, holding the chill at bay with comforting ease. Evergreen garlands wound along the walls, their dark green deepening the amber glow of the lamps, and on each table, a small winter flower or sprig of berries stood in a simple glass jar, like a tiny piece of forest resting in the heart of the city. The ovens radiated a steady heat, and from them rose the mingled scents of butter, sugar, spice, and something faintly bright that could have been orange or could have been the memory of sunlight on snow. The candle in the blue glass at the window burned with a steady, unwavering flame, its light blending softly with the lamps and reflecting in the glass, so that from the street it looked like a small, glowing star cradled in sea-colored ice. The clock on the wall ticked with calm determination, its brass pendulum swinging slowly, marking the minutes as they drifted down like flakes. Madame Elise moved through this gentle brightness with a special care, as if aware that the night was not like other nights. Christmas Eve had always been important in the bakery, even before it was hers. As a child, she had watched her grandmother prepare for it, the older woman's hands moving with a quiet joy that made even the simplest tasks seem filled with light. Tonight, Elise wore a soft, dark blue dress under her pale apron, the color echoing the quiet sky outside, and she had tucked a small sprig of evergreen at the neckline, its scent faint but fresh. Her hair, threaded with silver, had been gathered loosely, and a few strands had escaped to frame her face in soft waves. There was a glow to her, not bright or showy, but calm and steady, as if the warmth of the bakery and the stillness of the snow had settled into her bones. On the counter, arranged on a wide plate, lay the biscuits she had baked earlier, the ones from the page marked with a star in the secret book. Tonight, they were more than just biscuits of snow and starlight. This was the night they became the bakery's midnight starlight cookies, the ones her grandmother had always made only once a year, when the snow was thickest and the night most quiet. They were simple in shape, small, round, pale gold at the edges, but their tops shimmered faintly where sugar crystals caught the light. Under the lamps, they looked as if they had been dusted with frost or tiny fallen stars. The scent rising from them was tender and light, creamy with a hint of vanilla and something floral, like the memory of a garden under snow. Elise knew they were ready not just to be eaten, but to be given, as one might give a blessing or a wish. For a time, the bakery waited in stillness, breathing softly. Then, as the hour moved closer to midnight, the door began to open and close, the bell chiming its small silver note like a repeated, gentle greeting. The first to arrive was Lena, still in her nurse's coat, a scarf wrapped high around her neck, her cheeks rosy from the cold. Snow flecked the shoulders of her uniform, and the faint scent of antiseptic clung to her, but there was a softness in her eyes, as if the long, difficult hours of her shift had been smoothed by the thought of this place waiting at the end of the route. She gave Elise a tired, grateful smile and took her usual place by the window, where the lamplight and the snow formed a silent, silver theater beyond the glass. Soon after, the bell chimed again, and Marco stepped in from the night, shaking a little snow from his cap. His taxi idled a few streets away, resting until he returned for the last fares of the night. But for this hour, he belonged to the bakery. The lines around his eyes looked softer than before, as if the long roads and countless headlights had been tempered by some steady light he now carried inside. He nodded to Elise and to Lena, taking a seat where he could glance easily at the window and in his mind at the patient moon that always seemed to follow his path. His hands, when he unwrapped his scarf, looked more relaxed, as if they had found a place where they did not need to grip or steer. Clara arrived next, her coat buttoned close at the throat, a woolen hat pulled low over her ears. The shadows under her eyes had not vanished, and the sadness in her features still lingered, but it had softened at the edges, like snow drifting against a broken wall, filling in sharp gaps with quiet white. She paused for a moment just inside the door, breathing in the bakery's scents, then offered a small, hopeful smile. There was a subtle change in her posture, a sense that she now believed, even if only faintly, in the possibility of mending. She chose a table not far from Lena's, as if drawn toward another woman whose nights were spent holding together fragile worlds. Then came Hugo, his mailbag lighter than usual and slung more loosely across his shoulder. Only a few letters remained inside, and among them, the returned ones felt less like failures and more like wandering thoughts, still searching for their paths. His cap was dusted with snow, and his glasses, when he removed them briefly to wipe the lenses, carried a faint mist of warmth from his breath. He greeted Elise with a quiet nod and sat where he could see both the window and the plate of shining cookies, as if feeling that tonight the snow and the starlight had arranged some kind of meeting just for him. Noah arrived last among the familiar faces, his hood up and cheeks pink from the cold, hands buried in his pockets. The storm at home had not vanished, but since the night of the little bird and the quiet branch, he had found it easier to step back when voices rose, to imagine a tree at the edge of a field where he could rest inside himself. Tonight, his eyes held a softer light, the wary stiffness in his shoulders eased by the memory of being welcomed without question. He slipped into the bakery almost like a shadow, but once the door closed behind him and the warmth settled around him, some of that shadow seemed to dissolve. He nodded to Elise, to Lena, to the others, surprised and slightly comforted to see that this place belonged not only to him, but to an invisible circle of others who carried their own midnights. In addition to these familiar visitors, the night brought a few new faces. A woman with a violin case, its handle worn smooth by years of being carried through cold streets. An older man with a hat pulled low, whose eyes brightened at the sight of candlelight. A young couple holding hands, their steps slow and quiet, sharing a silence that felt deep and content rather than awkward. Each of them found a place at a table, shedding coats and scarves, letting the warmth and soft light soak into their tired limbs. The bakery filled slowly, not with noise, but with presence. The soft murmur of greetings, the hushed scrape of chairs, the clink of cups on saucers, the gentle sighs of people finally allowing themselves to rest. When everyone had settled, Madame Elise moved among the tables carrying plates, mugs, and small teapots. For Lena, she brought a cup of hot chocolate and one of the midnight starlight cookies, its surface shimmering faintly under the lamp. For Marco, she placed a golden waffle beside a cookie, the powdered sugar on the waffle echoing the delicate crystals on the biscuit. Clara received a small plate of gingerbread and a starlight cookie tucked among them like a quiet star in a cluster of warm spices. Hugo's plate held a custard tart and a cookie resting at its edge, as if listening for letters yet unspoken. For Noah, she brought a sugared brioche and one of the special biscuits, setting them down with the same care she gave to everyone else, as if each plate carried the same gentle promise. The newcomers, too, received their shares a cookie alongside tea or malt juice or warm milk, every plate bearing at least one of the biscuits that shimmered softly in the light. Elise did not make a speech. She did not ring a glass or call for attention. She waited instead until conversations had settled into a low murmur, until the clinking of cutlery had softened, until the room felt like a single, peaceful breath drawn in. Then, when she felt that the moment had ripened, she stood near the counter, her hands resting lightly on its edge, and let her voice drift gently into the air. Tonight is the night my grandmother used to call the night of quiet miracles, she said, her tone low and even, yet carrying easily to every table. Not the kind with trumpets and bright lights, but the kind that arrive like snowflakes, small and soft, so that you only notice them if you are sitting very still. She used to tell me that on Christmas Eve, the world listens a little more closely. Hearts that have been running and running all year finally sit down, and in that calm, small lights can find their way in. The room fell slowly, naturally quiet. People set down their forks, their spoons, their cups. Outside the window, the snow continued to fall, and a faint breeze moved along the street, stirring the branches so lightly that the motion was barely visible. Within, the lamps glowed steadily, their reflections shimmering in the glass, while the candle in the blue holder burned like a tiny star. In our bakery, Elise continued, we have a tradition. On this night, we share not our grandest stories, but our smallest, gentlest memories, moments that felt like a hand on the shoulder, a soft word, a silver thread of peace in a dark room. You do not have to share if you do not wish to. It is enough to listen. Listening is also a kind of gift. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Lena, at her place by the window, cleared her throat softly. Her fingers were wrapped around her cup, and her eyes were on the snow outside. There was a child at the hospital, she said quietly, a little girl who had been there for weeks. On Christmas Eve, 2 years ago, I had the night shift. She couldn't sleep, and I was so tired I didn't know how to comfort her anymore. I remember I just sat by her bed and started humming a carol my mother used to sing. Very soft, nothing special. After a while, her breathing slowed, and she fell asleep with her hand on the bed rail, like she was holding onto something invisible. I felt almost nothing at the time, just relief and the weight of the night. But the next morning, her mother told me the girl had smiled in her sleep. She said she dreamed that snow was falling inside the room, very lightly, and that someone was singing. That's all. It was a small thing, but I've never forgotten it. Her voice faded into the hush, and for a moment, the snow outside seemed to fall even more gently, as if honoring the memory. Marco spoke next, his gaze distant, turned inward toward roads long past. When I was a boy, he said, his tone slow, my father and I were driving home very late from my aunt's house on a winter night. The car was old. The heater made more noise than warmth. I was in the back seat, watching the moon follow us. The road was empty, the world dark except for our headlights and that soft, silver face in the sky. I felt safe, completely safe. No words, just the hum of the engine and the light on the road and my father's shoulders in front of me. That feeling has come back to me sometimes when I look in the mirror and see the moon. He smiled faintly. Tonight, it feels like it's here again, quiet and watching. Clara's hand rested lightly on her plate, a gingerbread crumb on her fingertip. "My gentle moment happened this morning," she said, almost surprised at herself. "I woke up in the small apartment I'm renting now. It was strange, still new, still not quite home. I made tea, and for a while, I just stood at the window, thinking of everything I had lost. I felt very empty. Then a bird, a little sparrow, I think landed on the railing outside, all puffed up against the cold. It shook itself, hopped once, and looked straight at me through the glass. It stayed there for a few breaths, just looking, as if checking whether I was still here, then flew away. I don't know why, but after that, the room felt less empty, as if I had been seen." She looked down, blinking once, then smiled, small and real. Around the room, others shared small memories. Hugo spoke of a letter addressed only with a first name and the word hope, which had somehow still reached the right person. The violinist murmured about playing a single soft piece under a bridge. One winter, and seeing an old man stop, close his eyes, and breathe in peace. The older man recalled the simple kindness of a neighbor leaving bread at his door when he was sick. The young couple remembered a night when, after a long argument, they had walked out under falling snow together and simply held hands until the anger melted. Each memory was small, almost fragile, but as they were spoken, they braided together in the warm air, forming a gentle, shimmering thread that seemed to weave through the tables, the chairs, the cups, the very walls of the bakery. Madame Elise did not add a grand story of her own, not yet. She listened, her eyes moving from face to face, her hands resting lightly on the counter, her heart absorbing each quiet miracle as if tucking them into the secret recipe book without need for ink. When the sharing slowed and silence settled once more, she moved again among the tables, topping up cups, straightening plates, placing her hand briefly on a shoulder here, a chair back there, the touch light and reassuring, like the brush of a snowflake against skin. Outside, the night wrapped itself more deeply around Snowfall Street. The snow continued to fall, soft and silver, and somewhere beyond the clouds, the stars shone steadily, listening. Inside the bakery, the midnight starlight cookies gleamed faintly on their plates, their sugar crystals catching the lamplight like tiny captured constellations. People ate them slowly, savoring their gentle sweetness, feeling something quiet and peaceful unfold inside them, like a flower blooming under snow. The minutes drifted by, unhurried, as if time itself had chosen to sit down at a table and rest, allowing hearts to breathe and soften. It was a simple night, in many ways, no bright fireworks, no roaring celebrations, no dramatic revelations, and yet, in the hush of the bakery, in the soft exchange of memories and cookies and warm drinks, something subtle and tender took shape. It was as if the snow outside, the stars above, and the small golden lights within had joined hands around the building, creating a circle of gentle miracles that needed no fanfare. As the hour moved toward midnight, and the candle in the blue glass burned on with a quiet, unwavering flame, the night bakery on Snowfall Street held its guests in a shared, peaceful embrace, each of them carrying a small, shining spark that would follow them back out into the silver, sleeping city. As the night deepened and the sharing of small, gentle miracles slowly quieted, the bakery seemed to fall into a deeper level of stillness, as though it had taken a long, peaceful breath and was now resting in the soft space between inhale and exhale. Outside the windows, the snow still fell, but more slowly than before, each flake drifting in a languid, thoughtful way, as if taking its time to choose the exact place where it wished to land. The light from the street lamps wrapped the flakes in silver halos, and from inside, it almost looked as though the snow were suspended in the air, pausing mid-fall to listen to the hush within the walls. The sky above Snowfall Street was a deep, muted blue-black, and here and there the clouds had thinned enough for a few stars to pierce through, small and steady, like pinpricks of quiet light. Inside, the warmth was soft and constant. Cups had been refilled. Crumbs of gingerbread and brioche and waffles lay scattered in small constellations on plates, and the midnight starlight cookies were fewer now, each one that remained gleaming faintly in the gentle glow. The murmur of voices had faded into a comfortable silence, broken only by the slow ticking of the clock and the faint rustle of someone shifting in a chair now and then, stretching tired legs or easing a shoulder. Yet it was not a heavy silence. It was light and full, the kind that comes when people feel safe enough not to fill every moment with sound. Lena sat by the window, her palms wrapped around her cup, eyes half on the snow and half on the reflection of the bakery lights in the glass. Marco leaned slightly back in his chair, arms loosely folded, as if the long roads of the night had finally flowed out of him and into the wooden floor. Clara's fingers played absently with the rim of her plate, drawing small circles in a stray dusting of sugar. Hugo's hands rested on his mailbag, the leather soft under his touch, while Noah's elbows were on the table, chin lightly in his hands, his gaze fixed somewhere between the garlands and the flickering candle. The newcomers, too, had settled into the quiet, their faces softened by the warm light, their eyes calm, their bodies resting in the gentle embrace of the room. In this hush, with snow and starlight pressed close to the glass, Madame Elise felt a small stirring in her chest, the same stirring she felt on certain nights when a story she rarely told tugged at her, asking to be given breath. She stood near the counter, her hands resting lightly on its smooth surface, and let her gaze travel over the gathered faces. There was no demand in their expressions, no insistence on more words, yet she sensed a shared readiness, a deep, collective listening that felt as soft and steady as the snow itself. "You have been kind enough to entrust your gentle memories to this room," she said, her voice low and even, flowing easily into the silence. "Perhaps before the night goes further, it is time I share one of my own, Not one of my grandmother's stories, but one of my own nights. A night that led me here. A night when I, too, was walking under falling snow and did not know where to go. Eyes turned toward her slowly, not with urgency, but with quiet interest, as if the entire room were leaning just a little closer. The lamplight touched her hair, its silver strands shining softly, and cast a delicate shadow along her cheek. She did not move to sit. She remained where she was, grounded by the counter, by the oven's breathing warmth at her back, by the candle burning steadily in the blue glass at the window. "It was many years ago," she began, "before this bakery belonged to me, before I knew how to read the language of snow and stars, before I believed that sweetness and stories could be enough to hold a night together. I had come to this city from somewhere else, a smaller town where I thought my life would unfold in one simple line. But life, as you all know in your own ways, rarely follows the lines we draw for it." Her eyes softened, seeing not only the room before her, but the younger version of herself, walking through memory. "I came with someone," she continued. "We thought we were building something together, a shared days, shared mornings, shared future. But slowly, in the quiet ways things sometimes end, that future unraveled. There were no great storms, just small, steady drifts of misunderstanding, words that failed to land, dreams that no longer overlapped. One winter's evening, much like this one, it became clear that our paths were no longer one path. There were no villains, no dramatic scenes, only two tired hearts trying to be honest. I left the apartment we had shared with a single suitcase and a coat that was not quite warm enough, and I stepped out into a city that felt suddenly vast and strange. She paused briefly, the silence welcoming her pause rather than pressing against it. The snow outside seemed to fall even more slowly, as though loath to touch the earth too quickly. "I did not have many plans that night," she said. "I had a small room in a boarding house waiting for me, and a job in a bakery I had not yet started. I knew the address, but I did not know the streets yet, and the map in my pocket might as well have been written in starlight. I wandered for a while instead of going straight there. The snow had begun to fall not long before I went out, fine at first, then thicker, each flake resting on my coat, my hair, my eyelashes. People hurried past me under their umbrellas and hoods, their faces blurred by fogged breath and the soft, silver curtain of the storm. I moved slower and slower, feeling as if the world around me were gliding forward while I remained in place, watching it pass. She drew in a gentle breath, the memory clear but no longer sharp. At some point, I realized that I was crying very quietly. The tears felt almost warm against the cold air. I remember looking up and seeing the streetlights hazy through snow and tears alike, like rings of golden mist. I felt, for a moment, like a small boat in a great dark sea, drifting without an anchor. I thought to myself, I have made a mistake. I do not know where I belong. I am alone. Her eyes moved to the window, where the candle's reflection flickered against the glass. But of course, I was not the only thing moving in that night. Life was moving too, in its soft, quiet ways. As I stood at a corner, unsure whether to turn left or right, a hand touched my elbow. It was not a hard or startling grip, just the light, respectful pressure of someone trying not to frighten me. I turned and saw an older woman looking at me with kind, steady eyes. She did not ask why I was crying. She did not ask where I had come from. She simply said, in a voice like warm tea, "My dear, you look as though you have been walking for a long time. There is a small bakery not far from here that keeps its lights on late. Come sit a moment where it is warm. You can decide your direction after you have rested." A faint smile curved Elise's lips, gentle and grateful. I might have said no. I might have shrugged and walked away. But something in her gaze felt like a hand on my shoulder, like the kind you all have spoken of tonight. A touch that does not hold you in place, but reminds you that you are real, that you are seen. So I followed her. We walked only a little way, down a quieter street where the snow lay thicker, and the noise of the city softened into a distant murmur. And there, at the end of that street, was a small window glowing with light, a candle in blue glass, a sign with curling letters, the smell of sugar and spice and warmth uncoiling into the cold air. Her listeners shifted almost imperceptibly, recognizing the description. Lena's fingertips tightened around her cup. Marco's eyes flicked instinctively to the window, to the very candle she had just named. Noah leaned forward, his chin still resting in his hands, as if afraid to miss a single word. "Yes," Elise said softly, reading their faces. It was this window, this door, this room, though it looked a little different then. The tables were older and the garlands less full. There were fewer lamps, but the light felt the same. The warmth felt the same. My grandmother stood behind the counter, her hair white as the snow outside, her eyes bright and gentle. The older woman who had brought me here stayed just long enough to help me hang up my coat and see me seated at a table. Then she gave my shoulder a soft squeeze and said, "You are in good hands now," and slipped back out into the snow as quietly as she had appeared. I never saw her again. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Even the clock's ticking felt slower, as though time itself were leaning in, remembering. My grandmother did not ask for my story that first night, Elise said. She brought me a cup of hot chocolate and a plate with a single small cake, dusted with sugar. She sat with me, not saying much at first, simply letting me breathe, letting my heart slow. After a while, she told me a story not about bells or birds or angels, but about a time when she herself had been lost in this same city and had been guided to a warm doorway by a stranger. "We are all carried by others more than we think," she told me. "We are carried by hands, by glances, by places that appear when we need them. And once we have been carried, one day, if we wish, we can help carry others." Elise's gaze moved gently from face to face, as if seeing each of them both in the present and in some other, quieter moment when they had themselves been carried by unseen kindness. "I began working here the following week," she went on, first in the mornings, then in the afternoons, until one winter, my grandmother's hands grew too tired to knead dough at dawn. Slowly, gently, she passed the bakery to me. But it was on another winter night, many years later, standing at this window and watching the snow fall, that I realized what I truly wanted this place to be. Not only a bakery, but a harbor. Not a place of grand miracles, but of gentle ones. A place where those who did not yet wish to go home could sit and breathe and feel the world soften around them, even for a little while. Outside, the snowflakes drifted in slow motion, some of them seeming to hover in the lamplight, caught for a heartbeat before continuing their descent. It really did look, for a moment, as if the snow had paused in the sky, holding still out of respect for the quiet unfolding inside. "So when you sit here," Elise said, her voice now little more than a tender thread woven through the silence, "know that you are part of a long chain of footsteps in the snow. A stranger led me to this door. My grandmother opened it. She held my heart in her gentle, flower-dusted hands, and over the years, she taught me to do the same for others. You, each of you, have walked streets I will never see, carried burdens I will never fully know. But you have come through this door for an hour, for a few nights, for perhaps only once in your life. And as you sit here, you are not just resting, you are also shaping this place. Your presence, your quiet, your small stories, they are the secret ingredients in the recipes. They are what make this light what it is. No one spoke. No one needed to. The room felt wrapped in a gentle, shared awareness, as if a soft blanket of understanding had been laid over every shoulder. The wind outside seemed to still. The snow, in its slow, silver descent, glowed more brightly under the lamps, each flake like a tiny, drifting blessing. Sometimes, Elise finished, we think we are alone, walking under the snow with nowhere to go. But often, without knowing it, we are already being guided toward a warm window, a quiet chair, a small plate with something sweet. We are already, in ways we cannot see, being carried by the kindness of those who came before us. And one day, perhaps without even planning it, we will help carry someone else. That is how the light continues. The silence that followed was deep and peaceful. No one rushed to break it. The snow outside, the stars above, the candle in the blue glass, the soft glow of the lamps, the warmth of the ovens, the gentle beat of many hearts at rest. All of it seemed to blend into one still, silver moment, suspended like a snowflake in midair. In that moment, time itself felt as if it had paused alongside the snow, holding the night bakery on Snowfall Street in a quiet, tender hand, before letting the night begin to turn slowly, gently, toward its closing. Midnight came softly to Snowfall Street, not with a sharp stroke or a sudden change, but like a slow turning of a page. The snow outside had settled into a finer, lighter fall, small flakes drifting down as if they were already half asleep. The sky had deepened to a rich, velvety darkness, and the few stars that peered through the thin places in the clouds shone with a quiet, silver patience. The lampposts still glowed, their halos resting gently on the snow-covered cobblestones, and the trees along the pavement wore their white crowns in peaceful stillness. Everything seemed to breathe more slowly. The night had reached that tender hour when even the city's restless heart beat in a softer rhythm. Inside the bakery, the warmth held steady, but it, too, had grown quieter. Conversations that had bloomed and faded earlier now lingered only in traces, like faint perfume in the air. Cups were nearly empty, plates were mostly bare, and the last crumbs of midnight starlight cookies sparkled faintly where sugar crystals clung to the porcelain. The lamplight fell more gently now, as if it knew that the night was nearing its close and wished not to dazzle, but to soothe. The candle in the blue glass still burned at the window, its flame small but unwavering, a last little star at eye level for anyone who might still pass by. The guests felt the shift in the air, each in their own way. Lena, by the window, glanced at the clock, its slow pendulum swinging with the same calm it had held all night. Her shoulders, which had dropped into a long, peaceful curve, straightened just a little as she remembered the ward waiting, the patients sleeping under hospital lights, the gentle beeping of machines in the quiet corridors. Yet she did not feel the same heavy weariness as when she had first arrived. Her tiredness was still there, but it had been wrapped in something soft, a memory of snow angels on rooftops, of small, unseen companions sharing the watch. She set down her cup and looked out at the falling snow, and for a moment she imagined each flake pausing above the hospital roof, listening before settling into place. Marco stretched his legs under the table, feeling the faint protest of muscles that had sat too long, then the grateful easing that followed. The thought of his taxi, waiting a few streets away, no longer felt like a summons to endless asphalt and cold wind. It felt like a familiar companion waiting patiently, its engine ready to purr, its headlights ready to carve gentle paths through the dark. He thought of the moon, pale and constant above the city, and knew that when he looked into his rearview mirror tonight, he would see not just a light in the sky, but an old friend following at a respectful distance, sharing the road. He brushed a few sugar crystals from his fingertips and smiled to himself, small and steady. Clara's hands rested lightly in her lap. The ache in her chest was still present, still real, but the night had settled over it like a soft blanket, smoothing its sharp edges. She felt as if some hidden thread inside her had been tied, loosely but firmly, to the bell in that village. From Elise's story, the one that had shattered and been mended with ribbons and memories. She no longer felt like shards scattered on a cold floor. She felt like something that might one day be lifted, carefully and kindly, into a place where it could ring again, perhaps in a softer, deeper tone. The thought did not erase her loneliness, but it wrapped it in gentleness, and that was enough for now. Hugo stroked the worn leather of his mailbag with a thumb, as if it were a living thing he was reassuring. The returned letters inside no longer felt like ghosts of failed journeys, but like small, folded wishes still waiting for the right wind. He imagined the snow outside catching the thoughts that had never quite reached their destinations and listening to them with patient attention. He imagined the stars holding those words in some distant silver archive, not forgotten, but safely kept. The idea warmed him more than the last sip of milk in his cup. He knew that when he walked his route again, he would feel the weight of the bag differently, not heavier, not lighter, but more meaningful, as if each envelope carried a tiny secret light. Noah sat a little straighter, his hands resting loosely on the table. His mind had returned several times, quietly, to the image of the small bird on the lone branch, to the feeling of stepping away from a noisy forest without abandoning it forever. He knew that when he went home tonight, the apartment might still hold echoes of raised voices. The air might still vibrate with old worries and repeated arguments. But he also knew that somewhere inside him there was a branch at the edge of a quiet field, and that he could perch there in his thoughts whenever the noise became too much. The knowledge settled in him like a calm stone at the bottom of a river, anchoring him gently without weighing him down. Around them, the violinist, the older man, the young couple, and the other quiet night walkers felt similar soft shifts. The violinist's fingers twitched once, imagining a few tender notes played in some echoing hallway, a lullaby for no one in particular and for everyone at once. The older man thought of the neighbor's bread left on his doorstep years ago and decided he might bake something simple tomorrow, just enough to share with someone who did not expect it. The young couple held hands under the table, fingers intertwined, grateful that the anger they had once felt seemed now like a distant storm viewed from behind closed, warm windows. At last, Madame Elise stepped away from the counter, smoothing her apron with a familiar gesture. The room quieted even further, not with a jolt, but with a soft, collective exhale. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The very air seemed ready to carry her words gently to every corner. "My friends," she said, the word falling with natural ease, as though it had been waiting on her tongue all night. "The hour has grown late. The snow is asking us to rest. It will keep watch over the street, over the rooftops, over the roads you will walk or drive. The stars, those that are visible and those that are hidden behind the clouds, will do the same." Her gaze moved slowly over their faces, taking each one in as if storing them carefully. "This room has been very full tonight, not only with people, but with your memories, your quiet miracles, your shared silence. I thank you for trusting this place with them." Chairs shifted softly as people began to prepare themselves to leave, not with the hurried movements of those eager to escape, but with the unhurried motions of those who have been allowed to rest and are ready now to step back into their own lives. Scarves were wrapped around necks, coats pulled from hooks, hats retrieved from the rack by the door. The air filled briefly with the faint rustle of fabric and the soft slide of chair legs on wood, like gentle waves against a shore. One by one, they came to the counter or paused near the door, offering their thanks in quiet voices. Lena gave a small, deeply meant nod, for for the story and the chocolate and the snow angels," she said. "I'll think of them when the ward is too bright." Marco smiled, the lines around his mouth creasing in a way that made him look younger. "For the waffle and the moon," he murmured. "The roads will feel different tonight." Clara's eyes shone, though no tears fell. "For the bell," she whispered. "For the idea that broken things can sing again." Hugo's hand brushed the strap of his bag. "For the snowflakes and the letters," he said. "I will carry them more gently." Noah hesitated, then offered a shy half-smile. "For the bird and the branch," he said simply, and for not asking too many questions. To each of them, Elise responded with a small, personal blessing, tailor-made and yet universal. "May your hands be steady and your heart light. May every road you take be watched by a quiet light. May the mending be patient and kind. May every letter you carry feel seen, even if only by you. May you always find a quiet branch when you need one." Her words were soft, but they settled like warm shawls around their shoulders. The bell above the door chimed again and again, delicate and silver, as they stepped out into the snowy street. Lena walked toward the hospital, her steps sure and slow, her figure soon softened by the falling flakes. Marco turned in the direction of his waiting taxi, his breath rising in pale clouds, the imagined moon already a comforting presence at his side. Clara headed toward her small apartment, the thought of the sparrow on the railing tucked in her pocket like a secret charm. Hugo followed his familiar route. The bag at his side weighed now with more than paper, but less with loneliness. Noah walked home through the silver hush, knowing that even if the forest was still noisy, the night held a quiet place for him. The others, too, disappeared into the gentle darkness, each carrying with them a little shimmer of starlight sugar, a remembered word, a new softness around an old ache. Soon, the street outside the bakery returned to its earlier stillness, broken only by the soft imprint of their footsteps, which the snow began, patiently, to fill. Inside, the bakery exhaled. The chairs stood empty, waiting calmly for the next night. The plates and cups rested where they had been left. Madame Elise moved through the room with her steady, unhurried grace, gathering cups, stacking plates, brushing crumbs into her palm. She washed the dishes in warm water, the steam rising in thin, silver curls that danced briefly in the lamplight before dissolving. She wiped the tables with a soft cloth, the scent of clean wood mingling with the lingering fragrance of sugar and spice and vanilla. Each small task was done with the same care she gave to measuring flour, to kneading dough, to telling stories. Cleaning, too, was a kind of ritual, a way of saying thank you to the room that had held so many hearts. When everything was in its place and the counters gleamed softly, she untied her apron and folded it neatly, laying it on its hook. The ovens were turned down, their glow fading to a deep, gentle warmth. She walked to the window, resting her fingertips once more on the cool glass. Snowflake patterns clung to the pane, delicate and fleeting. Beyond them, Snowfall Street lay very still, roofs and branches and cobbles united under a blanket of silver. The lamppost outside hummed quietly in the cold, its halo casting a peaceful circle on the snow. Somewhere in the distance, a clock tower chimed the hour, its sound softened by distance and the thick, forgiving air. At last, Elise reached for the candle in the blue glass. Its flame burned steadily, a tiny, faithful sun in its sea-colored cup. For a moment, she simply looked at it, the light reflected in her eyes. Then, in a voice scarcely louder than a breath, she spoke not only to the empty room, not only to the snow and the stars, but to every wandering heart that might pass under this sky, tonight and on nights to come. "May you be warm," she whispered. "May you be safe. May your steps be soft on the snow and your thoughts gentle with yourself. May every heavy thing in your heart grow lighter as you sleep. May the night wrap you in its quiet, and may morning find you with a softer gaze and a calmer breath. Wherever you are, whoever you are, known or unknown to this door, I wish you deep, peaceful, silver sleep." With that blessing resting softly in the air, she leaned forward and blew out the candle. The flame wavered, then vanished, leaving a small thread of smoke that curled upward like a final sigh. The room dimmed, lit now only by the street's faint glow and the last embers of warmth from the ovens. Elise crossed to the door, turned the lock with a gentle click, and hung the closed sign so that it faced the sleeping street. Outside, the snow continued to fall in soft, patient whispers. Inside, the night bakery on Snowfall Street settled into its own quiet slumber, holding in its walls the echoes of laughter, the weight of unspoken stories, the sweetness of shared silence, and the tender wish that somewhere, in many warm rooms under many roofs, people were closing their eyes and drifting into dreams. And if, in those dreams, there were the scent of sugar and spice, the sound of a small silver bell, and the vision of a narrow street under falling snow, then perhaps, somewhere deep in their resting hearts, they would know that a light still waited for them in the night, ready to open its door again when the hour and their wandering steps brought them back.